TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. Maduro wins big in court. Trump facing major backlash as his crooked, dirty plans fall apart. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, it's all falling apart. Day one. And they're already having to drop some of the biggest charges. Let's get into the content. Salute, family.
The U.S. Department of Justice modified one of the main charges against Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, removing the claim that he allegedly led a criminal organization known as the Cartel de los Soles.
Now,
in the update,
in the court, they dropped the charges that he was the leader of the narcotics trafficking organization, the Cartel of the Sun. We all knew that was fictitious, and we all knew they were never going to be able to say that man led no criminal organization, and they didn't have no evidence of that shit. That's very corrupt. That Trump been beating his chest. They've been beating their chest for months, saying the man led a criminal organization, a cartel organization, shipping kilos all over the world. They say, nah, we're going to drop that part of the indictment. What a joke. But that's a big win for Maduro. That's a big win for Maduro in court, but it's all falling apart.
The indictment, the prosecution maintains the charges of conspiracy to traffic drugs against President Nicolás Maduro, but no longer presents the Cartel de los Soles as a criminal organization itself, now describing it as a system of sponsorship and a culture of corruption driven by the drug money, very different from the hierarchical organization that President Donald Trump used to justify military deployments and blockades against Venezuela. The received indictments filed in New York reduces references to the Cartel de los Soles from 32 to just 2, dismantling the media fable spread by major global media outlets. This shift comes days after Maduro's kidnapping on January 3 and condemned internationally for violating international law. In November 2025, the Venezuelan government rejected the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's maneuvers to designate the non-existent Cartel de los Soles as a terrorist organization. According to Caracas, the strategy sought to perpetuate an infamous and veiled lie to justify an illegitimate and illegal intervention against Venezuela in the classic U.S. style of regime change. The Cartel de los Soles is
not... They made a big mistake. They just so much in a rush to snatch him. They know they wanted to kill him, but they said that was going to be just too much. That was going to be major backlash. That they killed him like he was Bin Laden. The big idea was to bring him to court. You have to prove these things you've been saying. The whole world is watching. You have to present the evidence to some of this stuff. We knew they'd never be able to present no evidence. He was the head of no drug trafficking cartel. We knew that. But they still got him.
Not mentioned once in the annual National Drug Threat Assessments from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, nor in the annual World Drug Report of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime.
Of each day, Donald Trump's fake charges against Nicolas Maduro are getting exposed. Not that anyone ever doubted that Trump had illegally invaded Venezuela on bogus charges. The charges that he made accusing Nicolas Maduro of running a non-existent drug cartel. But it's now become official. It has finally confirmed that we were all right in our suspicion against the rogue regime of Donald Trump. Yesterday, these bunch of depraved thugs presented Maduro at a local court in New York before heaping more humiliation on him by parading him on the streets of the city.
Now this is outrageous. When I seen this, I couldn't believe it myself. I think this got to be AI. It's not. This is not AI. These officers, whoever is escorting Maduro, they got to be they must be fired immediately for what they just did, what they doing. They open up the doors while they're escorting this man so people could cheer in the streets. USA. These people, whoever cheering this shit in the streets, some fucking clowns, need to get the hell out this country. A bunch of fucking bootlickers. But somebody could have killed that man and killed these officers if they wanted to. You see? This is very dangerous they did. And there's no protocol in the world where those officers can open this door. So what you finna see is they finna let journalists, they finna let the people start taking pictures. Now Maduro in here on the way to court. Good job. That man on the way to court, bro. Man, them people need these officers got to be fired, bro. That is, they have failed the security job they were supposed to be doing, protecting that man. You're supposed to protect this man. This man could have got killed or something by some real Venezuelan terrorists here who want to kill Nicolas Maduro. See, they playing with that man's life right there. And I know that man. That's when that man was scared for his life in there, when they open up them doors like that, letting all them people surround him like that. That's outrageous that the police is. I want you to understand, when they're escorting you when you're in the police custody, they got to follow all security procedures. That is the president of Venezuela. This was a high profile arrest. How in the hell can they be rolling down the road and open the doors open so people could yell and scream and people could come up and snap pictures and shit? You got to be kidding me, bro. And they need to be that shit need to be a big deal, and somebody got to deal with that. They should lose their job.
These thugs and human devils, to be precise, can go to any extent to humiliate fellow humans. We've seen their true colors in Gaza. So no, I wasn't surprised seeing this visual from New York. But what's astonishing is that the Trump administration has now spectacularly confessed to its crime of using fake charges against Nicolas Maduro. Don't take my word for it. This is what pro-Israeli and therefore pro-Zionist American New York Times has reported. Read the headline by the New York Times. It says, Justice Department drops claim that Venezuela's Cartel de los Soles is an actual group. When you read the details of this extraordinary confession, you will get a better understanding of the criminal action of these thugs. The New York Times reported that the new...
Now they dropped the number one thing that they started all this bullshit with was he was the head of a drug cartel called Cartel de la under this whatever. Now they saying, don't worry about that. We'll get him on some of this other shit that we putting together now. That's crazy. All of this over a lot as usual. And when they have to come to court, because they didn't think that, see, everybody keeps saying Trump and them didn't think this through. This is proof that they didn't think through. They supposed to whack them, but they got cold feet. They really wanted to go to war. They got cold feet. So just snatch them and see what they're going to do. See if he would break and confess. See, they wanted him to confess. That's why he snatched his old lady. He will not say he no drug kingpin. The first thing he said was in court where the whole world can know. He said, I am the president of Venezuela. That's a fact.
Indictment of Maduro and others on charges related to drug trafficking omitted a crucial element of the original charges. The criminal organization that Maduro supposedly ran, according to Trump and his fellow criminals, was called Cartel de los Soles. But what is Cartel de los Soles? You would be shocked to learn that this organization never exists. It never existed. Trump and his criminal colleagues in the rogue regime of the US used this fictitious term to malign a head of state. before kidnapping him with his wife. The original indictment filed against Maduro in March 2020 in the Southern District of New York has said that the kidnapped Venezuelan president was the head of Cartel de los Soles, which according to the US claims was a drug trafficking organization comprised of high-ranking officials that operated between 1999 and 2020. But as it emerged, Cartel de los Soles isn't a real organization at all. It's a slang term invented by the Venezuelan media to describe corruption. This was like someone accusing Trump of being the head of a mafia organization called Trumpism, and then using this pretext to kidnap him and his wife after bombing Washington and killing scores of people. Just see the level of absurdity of these clowns that the US State Department run by thug Marco Rubio even designated Cartel de los Soles as a terrorist organization as recently as in November. Congratulations, my dear American friends, for electing a bunch of murderous and illiterate clowns as your rulers. Then Trump today boasted about killing many people in Caracas during the illegal invasion of Venezuela and kidnapping of Maduro and his wife.
You know, people are saying it goes down with one of the most incredible. It was so complex, 152 airplanes, many, talk about boots on the ground. We had a lot of boots on the ground. But it was amazing. And think of it, nobody was killed. And on the other side, a lot of people were killed. Unfortunately, I say that, soldiers. Cubans, mostly Cubans, but many killed. And they knew we were coming and they were protected and our guys weren't. You know, our guys are jumping out of helicopters and they're not protected and they were, but it was so brilliant. The electricity for almost the entire country was boom, turned off. That's when they knew there was a problem. There was no electricity. Caracas, there's no electricity. It's not the only people with lights were the people that had candles.
You know, you think that's funny, but they've been doing that for years, turning those lights off. The United States on those Latin American countries, but Venezuela practicing for that day. They've been doing. You can go back and Google. They've been causing blackouts for years. The CIA just for that moment.
It was just off, so we sort of got him a little by surprise. But it was brilliant tactically. It was an incredible thing.
Does he sound like a decent human to you? He is a deranged sadist in desperate need of treatment. And this is what the UK government, led by Keir Starmer, is supporting. This so-called human rights lawyer has refused to describe the US action as a breach of international law. Yesterday, he refused to turn up in parliament and instead sent his pro-Israeli Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper. As expected, she was hung, drawn, and quartered by the opposition and her own MPs. Here are some examples.
If a large and powerful country does the leader of another, however abhorrent that leader is, and then tries to intimidate the smaller country in order, it says itself, to gain access to its resources, doesn't the Foreign Secretary agree that this should be called out? Not just by Britain, but by our Western allies. We should be calling it out for what it is, a breach of international law. It is not for the country that is breaking the law to say whether or not it has broken the law. It is for the West, surely, to stand up and say, call it as it is.
It was the Prime Minister that decided to disregard the United Nations Charter when it came to Trump's bombing, killing, and kidnapping of a head of state. I think it speaks volumes that the Prime Minister has chosen not to come to this House to explain his decision. The reality is this: if it were Putin doing this, the Prime Minister would not be saying, oh, it's up to the Russians to decide.
We are witnessing an existential threat to the international rules-based order, and the Prime Minister can't even rouse himself to give it even the meekest of defences. France, Spain, Brazil, Mexico and the UN Secretary-General have all been clear that the Trump administration has violated international law. When will the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary find their voices and join that chorus of condemnation?
During that attack, the Venezuelan president and his wife were abducted from their home and taken to the US on bogus drug-related charges. This Labour government is now refusing to assess whether this is legal. So I ask the Secretary of State this: if a foreign power accused the British Prime Minister of breaking its domestic law, bombed targets in the UK, killed dozens of British citizens, and abducted the Prime Minister and his wife in the middle of the night, would the government be able to say that was legal? Or is international law only something that applies when Donald Trump says it can? And in that case, is the Prime Minister and this Labour government anything more than Donald Trump's poodle?
You can watch the entire debate, which runs for over 2 hours here. This was always about oil, as rightly admitted by the US representative at the United Nations Security Council yesterday. They invaded Iraq and destroyed that country after looting their oil. Then they invaded Libya and destroyed that country after looting their oil. They invaded Syria and destroyed this country after looting their oil. They have plans to invade Iran and destroy this country for oil. And the same bunch of criminals have invaded Venezuela for oil. This is what the US representative at the UN has said yesterday.
You cannot continue to have the largest energy reserves in the world under the control of adversaries of the United States, under the control of illegitimate leaders, and not benefiting the people of Venezuela, and stolen by a handful of oligarchs.
Those calling the shots are big oil companies. Let's not forget this haunting headline in the aftermath of the Iraq invasion on bogus charges of weapons of mass destruction. BP, British Petroleum, benefited with billions of dollars worth oil from that genocide. Similar companies are now getting ready to make billions from Venezuelan oil. I will leave you with this clip from a parliamentary proceedings here in the UK. Remember the ban on Israeli hooligans from Maccabi Tel Aviv in October last year? Pro-Israeli British MPs are refusing to let go of this humiliation to their masters. So they called the officers from the West Midland Police for the second time today. Also giving testimony was the top functionaries of the Birmingham City Council. How dare anyone take away the sense of entitlement of these privileged Zionists? But see the glaring irony from today's proceedings. 5 out of 7 members of the Home Affairs Select Committee admitted to having links with Israel in one way or the other. And one of them had the audacity to question the conflict of interest of 2 councillors with anti-Israeli views on the committee that decided on the ban of Maccabi hooligans. Such audacity.
Before we start, if members of the committee could declare any relevant interest, and I will declare that I am a member and officer of Conservative Friends of Israel.
I'm a member of Labour Friends of Israel, Labour Friends of Palestine, but I'm also, for 40 years, the spouse of Lord Mann, who's the government's independent unpaid advisor on anti-Semitism.
And I'm the all-party parliamentary group chair against anti-Semitism. Sorry, the chair of the all-party parliamentary group against anti-Semitism.
I'm a member of Labour Friends of Israel. I travelled with Labour Friends of Israel to Israel in May of last year. I also attempted to travel to Israel with the Centre for the Advancement of Arab-British Understanding and was banned from entry into Israel later in the year. So I've been twice, but only got in once. I'm also a member of the Board of Deputies at British Jews.
And I received a donation from the Lib Dem Friends of Israel before the last election.
Thank you very much.
Do you think that it is appropriate for councillors who have predetermined views, anti-Semitic views, to sit on the SAG and be part of this decision-making process? And yeah, that's the first. Your fellow councillors, firstly, if you'd adopted the IHRA, where they're making anti-Semitic statements and generalisations on Twitter and in public meetings, that is a problem. So what action do you think what action should be taken as a result of that? And then secondly, how did these councillors find themselves on this committee, and why was it felt that it was appropriate that someone with these views would be making a decision of this nature? In that case, do you think it was appropriate that the councillors who were campaigning publicly to stop the football game and its
See, this is what Venezuela look like. See, the U.S. All of the people cheering, that they so happy in New York and they in Houston and they in California, they in Miami. They got, we have happy Venezuela. They need to take their ass back to Venezuela, bro. But if any of those people go to Venezuela, they got to deal with them. These people, millions of people who mad than a motherfucker about this. And the U.S. have a problem on their hand because the whole world can see these people say they want their leader back. They love their leader, and no one's cheering for the U.S. They're very pissed, except the bootlicking, bootleg, shoe shining Venezuelans in America and in Europe.
Nosotros no queremos que nos impongan un gobierno yanqui. Nosotros somos libres y soberanos. Nosotros somos un pueblo con garantías en la Constitución bolivariana. Somos un pueblo libre y soberano. Donald Trump no se va.
Only thing the U.S. can do is start a civil war. Now that's probably what we're gonna be. That's probably what we're gonna be looking at. The U.S. gonna buy off some people in the military who've been traitors. They're gonna have to fight the Chavistas. They're gonna have to fight the Bolivarian revolutionaries. But the whole world can see that the majority of the people is with Maduro. But the U.S. don't care. They took those handful of bandits in Libya and gave them the country and killed majority of Gaddafi lawless, murdered most of his sons, murdered a bunch of black people. Bodies was all over the streets, enslaved them. That's a fact. But the world is watching. They're not going to be able to do that in Venezuela. But we didn't think they were going to be able to do that in Gaza, that we sitting there watching them murder those men, women, and children. They could say the Venezuelans is hiding. They're using the people as human shields as they massacre all these people. They could say, well, hey, blame the Maduro terrorists who are using these people as human shields.
Rubio no nos va a gobernar. Nosotros tenemos un presidente y una vicepresidenta que asumen por ahora, pero nuestro presidente es Nicolás Maduro. No queremos a Rubio aquí, no queremos a María Corina y no queremos a Mundo. Cuando entre María Corina, vamos por ella. Cuando entre el Mundo, vamos por ellos. Nosotros tenemos presidente y vicepresidenta. Respeten a los pueblos soberanos. Ya basta de tanta burla, de tanta violencia. Somos libres y soberanos. No entendí cómo entraron esos aviones por su casa. Sí, yo vi cuando pasaron los aviones.
People ain't dropped in this live. They in here right now hiding out. Y'all know y'all in the audience right now. Man, no Venezuelans support no Maduro. Shoe shine. Who the hell you think you're talking to? Who the hell you think you're talking to tell me Venezuelans don't support the Bolivarian Revolution? You fool. You don't even know what that is. These are real Venezuelans. These are not the ones who flee their country and try to live off of us. These are the ones who stay in the country where, no matter how hard they get. These the real people deserve their land. They don't flee the land. They come over here and try to suck up all of our resources and then demand that we go overthrow people and kill people in their country. And if we killed everybody in their country, they still would never go back. It's too great over here for them. But this is what your news stations don't want to show you because they'll hit people. You're like, wait a minute, what the hell are we doing? Those people ain't celebrating. No, and they'll shoot at you. If your ass go over there, they're going to shoot at your troops.
Y bombardeaban, yo vivo aquí en La Pastora, y venían del Ávila, y pasaban tranquilitos, y no entendí cómo no salió nadie por ahí con una bazuca esa antiaérea a darle, porque ni siquiera una chancletica le lanzamos. Eso no lo puedo entender después de tanto entrenamiento, de tanto que se habló de la seguridad, de tanto que se habló del apoyo internacional de nuestros aliados. Todavía estoy tratando de digerir eso, de entender qué fue lo que pasó así, aquí, y cómo es posible que se haya llevado a nuestro presidente de esa manera sin que ellos hayan tenido una sola baja.
Come on, bro. Look at that. Those just regular women. Come on, bro. Come on, bro. They not gonna show that on the motherfucking news. Now I know some people that sit here and be like, "Oh, we got the fucking Marines and the Green Berets and Delta Force. What the hell are they gonna do?" Yeah, you do got those elite soldiers. That's not the fucking point. Your elite soldiers gonna have to kill regular, normal people. That's what I'm saying. Your special forces is gonna have to kill regular people who walking down the road with AKs and handguns because Maduro handed out millions of them to the Chavistas. They all armed. They're not gonna be showing this on American TV because people gonna wake up and be like, wait a minute, yes, the U.S. troops gonna have to shoot elderly old people, laugh all you want, like, oh, look at these people. One of them bullets at the AK will take your ass out regardless who's shooting at you. Everybody got an AK over there ready. Come on. Ain't nobody celebrating over there for no goddamn gringos stealing their shit.
Aquí está la gran fuerza motorizada de Caracas. Salió a las calles de Caracas a decirle al mundo que levante la voz por ese encuentro de nuestro presidente.
Oh, man, that boy got big choppers. Come on, man. That boy got big choppers. The people walking down the road with big choppers in their hand, the Americans need to see this. They're all armed. And once again, I know who the U.S. military is. Cool, you got to be the Nazis and kill everybody to steal their shit. That's what I'm saying. That's all I was trying to tell you. That everybody ready to fight. Everybody got a gun. They don't want to show this on the motherfucking news because this ain't the celebration they try to sell to the American people. These people love their president and love their country, and they're armed in the motherfucking streets about it.
¡Que viva la patria! ¡Y que viva Maduro! Venezuela con Nicolás. Venezuela con Nicolás. Venezuela con Nicolás.
Come on, bro. Come on, man. Man, come on, man. Hey, nah, bro. That's such a beautiful sight, bro. I ain't gonna lie to you, bro. Come on, bro. Come on, bro. Regular grandmothers. Them regular grandmothers. With them things, though. Them regular grandmothers walking down the road with them choppers in their hand, though. Guess what? They gonna just protect their yard. They're gonna protect their city. The United States military, you have to kill those old ladies. I know you don't mind doing that to some of y'all killers in the U.S. military, but I'm saying you're gonna have to while the whole world watch you. And a lot of U.S. military people will die in this type of guerrilla combat because this some of that you don't know who with you. They can say, "Hey, smile USA," then shoot your goddamn invading ass. This guerrilla war, bro. See, this is what we talked about. See, they laughed. See, Trump lied. Trump said he controlled Venezuela. Is this his soldiers? I didn't know this was MAGA. This MAGA? This is MAGA, bro. I heard some people on the news say a handful of people was protesting. They said a small group of people was protesting on behalf of Nicolas Maduro. What type of lie? It's only a few people stayed home, nigga. And like I said, everybody got a gun. You got one in her purse. 38. Not free Maduro, boy, the Lord tell him, because he a regular guy. He just was a good guy, man. Who become president. Now I'm hearing that some Venezuelan bootlickers in the government was upset with him because he had a lot of the Cubans backed him, but the Cubans was real revolutionary. So yeah, they're gonna back Maduro. I'm pretty sure Putin told him to do that. But the U.S. turned a lot of Venezuelan bougie against him. But
and now we go live to Venezuela. People are gathering, are marching, are demonstrating in support of
like
President
I said, this is supposed to be
Maduro.
all on the news. This is the Great Women's March. All kind of women came out in the street.
In a U.S. military attack that was held on January 3rd, that also undermines a fundamental principle of international law agreed upon after the horrors of two world wars. Washington's actions that have weakened the only mechanism that the international community have to prevent global conflicts. This is a moment of unification in which the people of Venezuela are showing their maturity, are also saying that they are also willing to support the government, the Bolivarian government, and the Bolivarian project that at this moment remains firm, remains solid as well, with the full implementation of the Constitution. The National Assembly has been installed, as well as the Executive Vice President and now acting President of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, has been also sworn in a process as well of full respect for the mandate of the Constitution and also the mandate of President Nicolás Maduro Moros, which was keep the country moving, keep also working for the unity of the homeland, for the preservance of peace as well, in a context in which also the country is seeing with pride the acting of its president in the face of all of these atrocities that have been committed against the people of Venezuela, against the sovereignty of a nation that also has been preparing for months to defend peace, and now they are doing so in this way, demonstrating together and saying to the world, Venezuela is united, Venezuela is at peace at this moment, and is willing to keep defending its institutions, its Bolivarian government, and also its peace.
Over the past few days, you might have noticed something. Might have noticed a cleverly crafted psychological operation unfolding. MAGA influencers and random accounts sharing all kinds of fake or old videos. I wonder why that happens. Like who gets the marching orders, sends it out, when everyone's like tweeting the same thing, almost the same sentence structure, using the same videos. It's all very curious. Using old videos or even fake videos or AI videos purportedly showing happy Venezuelans who are taking to the streets by the thousands in celebration of the CIA's regime change operation in that country. Here are just a few examples of these fake videos or old videos. Here's Nick Shirley, who done some incredible journalism in Minnesota with the Somalis, right? But tweets this, wait a minute, the mainstream media lied to us again? People of Venezuela actually didn't like being ruled by narco-terrorists. World Cup style celebrations are erupting all across Venezuela at the moment. Congratulations to the people of Venezuela. But when he says World Cup style celebrations, they actually were.
Imagine they was some Americans who were watching cultfigga and other credible stations thought the Venezuelans were celebrating. Something popped up in our live a couple of days ago to tell us don't act like the Venezuelans like Nicolás Maduro. Where are those clowns at right now? They've been listening to propaganda from Twitter, X, ran by Elon Musk, who wants to steal the resources of Venezuela.
World Cup style celebrations in celebration of soccer games. Football. So this is Miami. This is not Venezuela. This is at a Miami gas station. Okay.
Elon
World
Musk
Cup style. World
is
Cup
doing the same
style.
thing.
I love the World Cup style.
Yeah, exactly.
With no irony at all, which is like they actually are soccer game, football game celebrations. But okay.
And it's so confusing that they're leaving them up. All of them are getting community noted, but leaving them up there. So whose rules are you playing by? If I were to tweet something false and get community noted like that, I'd be really embarrassed and take it down.
Because Mark Twain, isn't it go back to Mark Twain, right? That a lie can travel halfway around the world before truth has a chance to put on his pants.
Mm-hmm.
And so how many people actually look at community notes? Like you and I look at community notes. I'll ask our chat room, how many of you guys like look at community notes? Do you guys actually pay attention to them? Probably a lot of you do, but you guys are badasses. You guys actually pay attention to the facts. But I think what a lot of people do, they scroll through it and they're just seeing, oh my God, Venezuelans are celebrating that Maduro has been captured by the CIA. And they're like, yeah, I guess that's true. And they don't really go a little layer deeper. And so that's why they're keeping them up there, because they're still getting thousands of views. Go ahead, David.
Well, I was going to say, there's another Twain saying that it's easier to fool someone than to convince them that they've been fooled. So it's like, once you fool them, they know that's what how propaganda works. You fool them, and then it's hard for everybody else to convince them that they've been fooled, because they're not going to believe you.
Yeah. So many people in a chat room are like, yeah, I don't even look at community notes. I don't look at community notes. But other people are like, I read. Yeah. But it is crazy, because this is happening. Here's another one. Here's another example from Tara Bull. And they all basically say the same thing, almost the same phrasing. This is exactly what the media doesn't want the world to see. Or they change it up a little bit and say, this is exactly what the mainstream media doesn't want the world to see. They're all using almost exact same phrasing. And this video that she shared can you put that one back up? Sorry, I was going to read the community note there at the bottom. Yeah, this video shows students participating in the underwear run, which is a tradition at U.S. universities like UCLA or Chapman University, where they run in underwear to de-stress before finals. It was a whole bunch of people. If you zoomed in on the video, you could see all these people running in their underwear in America. Has nothing to do with Venezuela, but Venezuela celebrates and Democrats cry.
But also this notion that if you don't like the fact that the U.S. can abduct a foreign leader and indict them on thin charges and, violate sovereignty, then you are pro-Maduro. How boring. We've seen this. If you're against the war, you love Putin. If you're against the war, you love Hamas. If you're against the war, you love Saddam. Stop it.
We are America.
It's boring and tired.
How about this? We are America first. That's it. Full stop. Right. And keeping the interests of America in the front and center. That's it. Our infrastructure is crumbling. The cities across America that are overrun with fentanyl, the CIA pumping drugs across the United States. I mean, this has got to stop. So that's what we are. We are America first. Full stop. We're not neocons. We're not Lindsey Graham supporters of any kind.
But I think that what this last one we put up is that Democrats are crying. Well, Democrats hate everything that Trump did, no matter what, right? And so that is, okay, that's a valid distinction, that Democrats are not, they're just hating it because Trump did it. Maybe, right? But you don't know. Maybe there are constitutionalist Democrats that forgot the Constitution during the Biden years. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. This is not, again, a partisan problem. We can unite and decide we're not supposed to do this. We don't want to get away with this.
Yeah. Well, and the Democrats were the ones backing Juan Guaido and pushing for, right. So,
right.
Right. Yeah. Like a fake, you install another puppet government there that no one actually wanted. Here's another one shared by many large accounts. This is Alex Jones sharing this one. He got hammered for this. He actually shared two different ones that he got hammered for. Video, he says, millions of Venezuelans flooded the streets of Caracas and the other major cities in celebration of the ouster of communist dictator Nicolas Maduro. Now we need to see the same type of energy here on the home front. And as you can see at the bottom there, this video is from anti-Maduro protests back in July after the election. Has nothing to do with being captured by U.S. special forces. And then this one was being shared all over again. The corporate media is refusing to cover Venezuelans celebrating around the world. There's now a total news blackout. Thank God for X. But of course, this video, as you can see in the community note, this video shows crowds celebrating Argentina's 2022 FIFA World Cup victory in Buenos Aires, not Venezuelans reacting to recent news in Venezuela. But it keeps getting shared all over the place. And as journalist Glenn Greenwald said, he's like, first, all of these like MAGA influencers that, receive these binders on Epstein, all of these, like CIA loving assets or whatever, they were sharing all this content, all of these videos, and it's still up, as Emily was pointing out. Now, as Glenn Greenwald pointed out, now you're actually starting to see real videos from real journalists on the ground in Venezuela covering large protests. And what are they saying? Well, here's one from a few hours ago. Watch.
We are in downtown Caracas. A huge march stretched through the city today, full of people who support Nicolas Maduro, who support the government, but also many people who don't, who never supported Nicolas Maduro. But what unites all of them is that what happened they find unacceptable. They simply cannot accept that America came. They bombed Caracas. their capital. They kidnapped Nicolas Maduro, and they thought that they could dominate Venezuela. What people here want to show is that they remain unbroken, that bombs and guns and jets won't break them, and that if the United States returns with the threatened military operation, that these people, they will resist, that the women, the men, even the children, they say, will continue to resist, and they won't give up their homeland, they won't give up their minerals, their oil to Donald Trump.
Wow.
Well, that's exactly what that sign just said. Trump, something conoce la fuerza de Venezuela. He will know the strength of Venezuela because we are not Americans and we don't intend to be. The only countries that really want American intervention is Israel and Ukraine. The rest of them are pretty much
Canada.
like, no, thank you.
Vancouver, Canada.
Right.
Right. Yeah, which has been totally overrun by East Indians. And the Chinese. Vancouver is not like what it used to be for sure. So there's a uniting message in that from those people there. Like there were people that were like not even fans of Maduro, but they came out because they're like, wait a minute, the CIA and Donald Trump bombed our country and now they're going to pilfer our minerals. Like we don't like Maduro. You might like Maduro and we're sort of coming together. Like that's what's happening. Like that's actually what's happening. I mean, I'm no fan of Maduro. But it's not my country. But my point is the United States shouldn't be involving itself, bombing, kidnapping world leaders, and then taking over the administration of that country.
And there's a strong template that, hey, do you want to be Yemen? Do you want to be Syria? Do you want to be Panama? Like
Libya?
Probably not. Probably they know what's coming for them if this plan plays out.
Now I want to talk about today's sponsor, which is tied to everything that we just talked about and this geopolitical shift. And I want to set it up by saying this: Nobel Prizes, Southern District of New York, where Venezuelan President Maduro and his wife are being held, charged in that 25-page indictment. This morning, they both pled not guilty to every charge, and we learned that Maduro actually also hired Julian Assange's lawyer, Barry Pollock. There he is.
Got a badass lawyer.
Pretty big deal, I think.
Yeah.
And here you can see when the council entered that in, Barry Pollock is now his attorney. There you go. We have a lot of legal questions to unpack here, like the choice of jurisdiction, what was like mysteriously absent from this indictment, like no mention of fentanyl, yet that's why we were bombing all of these.
Come on, bro. I told you, day one, they threw out the biggest bullshit. Fentanyl gone. Because they can't prove he trafficked no fentanyl. All of a sudden, he ain't the leader of this fictitious cocaine trafficking group because he don't sell cocaine. So now they're going to get into nefarious ties to Iran and China, which could hurt the U.S. They got to come up with some other shit that could be national security interests. But the one thing they whipped up all Americans about, he was killing Americans, weapons of mass destruction, fentanyl, no way in the indictment.
These narco boats because of fentanyl, so that's not in the indictment, and so much more. For that, we want to bring in someone who knows more about New York law than just about anyone, and that is Judge Andrew Napolitano, host of Judging Freedom and good friend of our show. Great to see you, Judge. Happy New Year to you.
It's a pleasure to be on with you guys, and I was listening to the conversation with the two of you and my longtime friend, Thomas Massey, and he is the personification of personal courage.
Really, he is.
That's for sure.
He's
also the personification of fidelity to the Constitution. Something about the water in Kentucky, Thomas Massey and Rand Paul.
It is crazy, right? I mean, it's so sad that we have to say this, that there's only like two voices, maybe three in Congress that we can like rally around and say they put the Constitution and America first, and they don't want us bombing other countries. They don't want us invading and kidnapping leaders of foreign countries, no matter how like the CIA spins it to all their MAGA influence.
That used to be our people, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, the Panthers, they was the ones denouncing this type of shit. Now we can't get a black leader to stand on this type of shit no more. That's crazy, bro. They not allowed to denounce the U.S. violence all around the world. That's a fact. They not allowed to.
They get binders and all of that stuff. Just drives me nuts. It makes my skin crawl, and I'm so fed up with it. I want to join Natalie's effort party because I'm so sick and tired of it. It really makes me furious, Judge.
I'm onto something.
But talk me down off the ledge, Judge. Southern District of New York. Why the hell is Maduro in New York?
Well, the Constitution says that if a crime was committed outside the United States, that the person should be tried in the district in which they first set foot in the United States. So the feds actually can choose the location. For years, they were having people fly to Dulles because the Eastern District of Virginia has the highest conviction rate of any federal district court in the country. So I don't really know why they chose New York, but they obviously deliberated over this and specifically chose it. He landed not at JFK Airport, which is, though, in New York City, it's not in the Eastern District. He landed in Westchester County at a very small airport called Stewart Airport. So they intentionally decided to bring him to the Eastern District, to the Southern District. Newark Airport is in New Jersey. LaGuardia Airport is not in the Southern District. JFK is not in the Southern District. Only this little airport that they chose. So they chose it specifically, and I can't tell you why. The laws are not different because we're talking about federal laws. The attitude of the jurors are probably slightly more pro-defense, slightly, in Manhattan than they would be in Virginia. But they knew what they were doing, and this is what they chose, and this is where the case will be. They also have a judge on their hands who's not particularly known to bend over backwards for the federal government, as most federal judges do. This judge, Alvin Hellerstein, doesn't carry any water for the federal government. And though I hope that
he's not able to say this and nobody else able to say this, I don't like that Hellerstein, Goldstein, Weinstein with nobody Steen or Goldman or Feynman or Abraham or Abramowitsch would get no case like this when we know the small hat sicked Trump on Venezuela. Now, all of a sudden, a 91-year-old Steen gets this case. Come on, man. I didn't like that. As soon as I heard the last name, I'm like, this is crazy.
there won't be a trial because he should be sent back home since he was kidnapped. But if there is a trial, the feds are not going to have an easy time and the defendant's going to get a fair shake.
Now, what do you make of this indictment? I tried to follow it and I was like, what? Mexico here? Colombia? What are we doing here? It was like a bad spy novel.
I agree with you, Natalie. Even though this indictment was crafted by an experienced prosecutor, the same prosecutor who crafted the indictment of President Maduro in 2020, it looks like it was very hastily put together. I'm going to guess that Main Justice in D.C. told them something's going to happen very soon. We need a superseding indictment, and they just threw this thing together. On the gun charge, it's inconceivable that he could be convicted of possessing a gun in Caracas, which is illegal in the U.S., but legal for the president of the country to possess in Caracas. They also cite a statute that has largely been invalidated by the Supreme Court of the United States, the Firearms Control Act of 1934. So the firearms statute, there are two of them. One is the actual possession and the other is conspiracy to possess. They should both be dismissed by Judge Hellerstein off the bat. We do have these jurisdictional issues. Even if the president says he wasn't the head of state because he didn't win the election, he was sworn in as the head of state. He exercised all the powers of the head of state. The legislative and judicial branches of his government recognized him as the head of state. None of these things was the case for Manuel Noriega, but all of them are the case for Nicolas Maduro. So he should enjoy that immunity. Moreover, in one of his more unguarded moments, of which there are very many these days, President Trump said on Sunday afternoon, this was an attack on a sovereign state. Well, that's a defense to the kidnapping, because if it was an attack on a sovereign state, A, it would require an act of war or otherwise authorization for the use of military force by the Congress, which they didn't get, and B, the head of that sovereign state is immune from prosecution for things that he did in his official governmental capacity.
Which
I
is
can't predict
what
where all
President
this is
Trump
going to
was
go.
let off for, because the Supreme Court allowed certain charges against President Trump because he was acting in official capacity. So you would think this administration would know that. But don't you see the irony here, or am I just making a joke?
If the immunity decision by the Supreme Court, one of its worst in the modern era, but if that decision were to be applied to Manuel Noriega, and I'm sure that his lawyers will make that argument, there's no case against him at all, because in Latin America, these decisions, whether to protect and cooperate with the CIA crafted mechanisms for distributing drugs, which the CIA is distributing, the decision whether or not to protect that is an official governmental decision, immune from prosecution under the Supreme Court's immunity decision.
A friend of the show, Kevin Shipp, has long said, we got to get rid of the States Secrets Act. And what a problem that is, because so the CIA can lay claim to this, the State Secrets Act. Pam Bondi has now used it twice to basically say, we're not going to, there's no discovery. Sorry, we're not even going to bring this to a court case. State secrets. Well, the CIA has been actively involved in Venezuela for more than a decade at least. Yeah. Largely, and according to the sources we've spoken to, this was all a CIA operation. They even knew even according to the New York Times, the CIA even knew the names of Maduro's pets, for crying out loud. There was no resistance at all. He was just basically handed over to the United States government. No bodyguards went to bat for him, nothing. I mean, this was a CIA operation from top to bottom. So if this does go to trial, how, will state secrets be implied here or put in place? And what sort of CIA backings will prevent anything from coming out in these proceedings? What do you think?
I agree with your colleague who says the statute should be abolished. And I would go even farther and say the whole doctrine, which existed before the statute did, that the government can keep anything secret, should be abolished. I mean, the whole state secret doctrine is based on a lie. It's a simple plane crash in which CIA agents were killed, and when their spouses sought to sue the government, the CIA refused even to acknowledge that their husbands were on the plane, much less where it was and what it was doing. And the Supreme Court upheld that nonsense. And from that has sprung decades of state secrets, and then eventually the statute. The statute was actually intended to allow a federal judge to pierce the state secrets or to permit certain limited amount of secrets to be handed over to defense counsel. But I think that Maduro is probably so familiar with what the CIA has been doing that the very threat to expose this during the course of litigation should be enough to terrify the government into working something out with them. I mean, the way you do this is to file a document with the court, and do not file it under seal, because when a lawyer files something with the court, the lawyer is absolutely immune from what he says in the document. He can't be a prosecutor or civilly sued for what's in the document. So if his lawyers do that and reveal what the CIA has been doing, you'll terrify the government into realizing the mistakes that it's made. Look, I don't hold any
Do you
water.
think
I
that
don't
Barry
hold any
Pollock
water.
would do that? What kind of stock do you have in him?
I think he would do that. I think this is a career-making case for him. His work for Julian Assange, while brilliant and effective, was limited to negotiating the plea agreement. But anybody who has Nicolas Maduro as a client and has an opportunity to make the case go away, either by threatening and scaring the government or by demonstrating to a very neutral and impartial jurist that this is an inappropriate prosecution, would use every means available at his disposal to do that.
Well, that's exciting, right? That get you excited?
It would be exciting. It would be exciting if the Trump administration and the neocons now controlling the president, from Rubio and Hegseth, and of course your husband and I know Pete very well, from Rubio and Hegseth on down, learned a lesson that you can't get away with this. Congress is too weak to do anything. This was clearly an invasion intended to decapitate a government by removing the head of state. You mentioned that nobody died. There were actually 32 Cuban bodyguards who were murdered by U.S. troops as they attempted to defend Maduro. Everybody else rolled over and played dead because they were probably bribed. I would imagine that the current and new administration in Caracas is seeking out those who were bribed and will prosecute them for treason.
Can I just please ask you a question? But I just want to say, we're not rooting for Nicolas Maduro here to rule the world.
No, not at all.
But we are saying that we should be held accountable for what we have done in Venezuela. And if it takes a lawsuit to do it, that I am rooting for. Go ahead.
Well, in the same way that we would want, Mike Pompeo held accountable for trying to assassinate Julian Assange in an embassy. I mean, we have a constitution in the United States. And if you believe in the Constitution, you should be held accountable for that. If you want to declare war on a country, you need to go through Congress to do that. So that's what we're saying here.
When Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, acting archivist, I think I'm missing one of his titles, Marco Rubio, head of USAID, when Marco Rubio was asked over the weekend, why didn't you go to Congress? He said, oh, that's easy. There's two reasons. First of all, Congress leaks. And the minute we went to them, somebody would have leaked it. And secondly, this was an emergency. And in an emergency, we don't have to go to Congress. Now, why didn't the interrogator say, what was the emergency?
Right.
An emergency is defined in a federal statute as a sudden and unexpected event, which will more likely than not have an adverse effect on the American economy or American national security. What emergency was there? But that question was not pushed to him because I don't think he could have answered it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the fentanyl that's coming into the United States, which is a crock of shit. Anyway.
Nobody believes that this is about drugs. The jurors are not going to believe this is about drugs.
Yeah.
This is about an effort to allow Marco Rubio's benefactor, Paul Singer, to recontrol Citgo and become more of a billionaire than he already is. And the president has friends in the same category.
Can I ask you?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. So I was going to say, Judge, I just want to ask you before we let you go about this indictment. Are there any pieces of it that you think have teeth?
Well, it'll depend on what the proofs are. The one about the guns, in my view, goes away immediately. So the big issue is, was he the head of a drug cartel, and what proofs do they have? They're going to have somebody who's going to say it, and that person's going to have a lot of baggage because they're probably a drug dealer themselves. And so it'll depend upon whether the jury believes it. Usually, when a bad guy turns state's evidence and testifies against a defendant, the jurors believe it, no matter how bad the bad guy was. But it's going to depend on what evidence they have and out of whose mouth it comes. Look, if it's true, it's a horrific crime, and it produced a lot of cocaine into the United States. On the other hand, if you're the president of Honduras, who was convicted of distributing thousands of pounds of cocaine to the United States and sentenced to 48 years in jail, you get off scot-free because you and the president have mutual friends.
Well, and let's be honest, the CIA is the facilitator of all of this into the United States. It's the largest facilitator of drugs into the United States. If we wanted to shut off that spigot, we could do it like that. Immediately, we could shut it down.
That is a defense which Manuel Noriega did not use.
Yeah.
But Maduro may very well use it, and it may terrify the government. It'll certainly be an eye-opener to the American public to have these things that you and I know has happened, that everybody in the government knows has happened, come out under oath in a public courtroom.
Yeah.
It's possible, though, because Noriega was best friends with the head of, well, best friends, right? He was close with the head of the CIA, and he was a CIA asset until he became less useful, that he thought they were coming to save him. You know, that he left that out thinking that friendship would eventually pan out for him. And
yeah, CIA is great friends.
What is the saying about making friends with the U.S.?
All the senior military people that the CIA bribed in the past couple of months who were asleep, figuratively and literally, when Noriega was kidnapped, probably thought the CIA would save them. They will soon be incarcerated where they will not be able to spend the money that the CIA bribed them with. And of course, bribery is a federal crime for the CIA to engage in, no matter where the money is paid. That money comes from the federal treasury.
Right. Well, and it's also a lot of the money that raised from their own drug trade. So they make a lot of money from the federal treasury and all of the drugs that they push on the American people. So the CIA, largely the most demonic, evil organization, maybe arguably in the history of the world. Judge, great to see you as always.
Thank you.
Thank you for your astute analysis as always. And there was no one we wanted to speak to more about this than you. Thank you, Judge, as always.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Ritter's Rant. Today, we're going to be talking about the Battle of New York. Now, I'm not talking about going back in time and to the American Revolution, although many of the ideas that will be discussed in this rant are revolutionary and do, in fact, date from the time of the birth of our constitutional republic. But I'm talking about the battle that's being waged today in a courtroom in Manhattan. The courtroom of a district judge named Alvin Hellerstein. He sits on the bench of the Southern District of New York, and Hellerstein is currently overseeing the trial, or at least preparatory arguments in anticipation of a trial of Nicolas Maduro and his wife, who were illegally abducted by American Special Operations Forces earlier this week. Alvin Hellerstein is 92 years old. He's been around for a while. I think in 1989, he was appointed to the bench by Bill Clinton. Interesting character. He's been overseeing the Maduro case since the 2020 indictment. He's the one who set forth the indictment, heard the grand jury argument, and and he's the guy who created the paperwork that created the justification that was used by the Trump administration to take Maduro into custody. But, the indictment doesn't give carte blanche for the United States to forego constitutional due process. And Hellerstein is on record in the past. Just last year, he opposed a Trump administration decision to deport Venezuelan illegal immigrants, citing that they had been denied their due process. So legal processes do matter. And so this will be interesting to see what Hellerstein does. At this juncture, he's not in the business of hearing arguments. He took the plea, a not guilty plea from Maduro and his wife, and has set the next court date to be March 16th. And I think we can see by the delay between court dates, that this is going to be a long, drawn-out affair, as American justice normally is. Now, why am I calling this the Battle of New York? Look, plain and simple, what's happening here today isn't just an assault on, the rule of law. It's an assault on the very fabric of the identity of the United States of America. We have a situation where the sitting president of the United States, in absolute disregard for both the Constitution and international law, has taken into custody the sovereign leader of a sovereign state. This is a straight up violation of the Charter of the United Nations. Now, people will say, well, what does the United Nations matter? I mean, Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, certainly doesn't believe that the United Nations matters, but it does. You see, when we look into the Constitution of the United States, we note that the President of the United States has authority to enter into treaties, and that when these treaties are ratified by 2/3 of the United States Senate, they take on the effect of law. And subsequent decisions by the Supreme Court of the United States, one in, I believe, 1824, the other in 1886 or so, basically say that treaties are the supreme law of the land. When we enter into a treaty relationship, we sign it, the president signs a document and the Senate ratifies it, it becomes the law of the land, constitutionally enforceable. And so when we have Marco Rubio and Donald Trump and others saying international law doesn't matter, when we have American citizens say international law doesn't matter, what you're saying is the U.S. Constitution doesn't matter. The rule of law doesn't matter. And now we have a problem, because this is a constitutional republic, and the only legitimacy it has as a sovereign nation is its constitution. So the moment you say the Constitution doesn't matter is the moment you say that the United States of America no longer exists as a constitutional republic. And this is the problem. A significant number of Americans seem to believe that this government, this president, is above the law. He can do anything he wants. The Constitution is an impediment. It's not, ironclad law. It's an obstacle that needs to be navigated around. This is extremely problematic. Now, the Constitution, has put in protections against presidents going out of control. We have a system of government that has checks and balances, 3 separate but equal branches of government. So here we have an executive that's clearly off the rails, doing whatever it wants, in total violation of international law and total abrogation of its constitutional duties and responsibilities. But we have a Congress that should be able to step in and do something, but they're not. Congress is asleep at the wheel. Congress has totally allowed itself to be castrated when it comes to war powers, allowing this president to do anything he wants and not doing anything to hold him to account. And Congress is silent on the issue of treaties. You see, again, not to get too much into the weeds here, but when we sign a treaty, it is the law of the land. Now, the president can decide if the United States doesn't want to adhere to a treaty, and he does this through bilateral negotiations or discussions with the nations involved. And if it comes down to it, nations can find one another in breach of treaty obligations, and this can lead to war. But that's not what's happening here. The president just ignored it. The nation at stake is too weak to do anything about it. And now he's taken a leader to court. But the court has no jurisdiction. You see, the treaty is the law. And unless Congress enacts legislation that modifies, repeals, or otherwise, puts conditions on this treaty law, the law is the supreme law of the land, and the United Nations Charter prohibits the United States from going forth and seizing Nicolas Maduro, the legitimate president of Venezuela, and bringing him to the United States. We have no jurisdiction over this matter. No court can see this case. No court can see this case. because Congress has taken no action to modify the United Nations Charter in a manner that allows Trump to do this. So now it comes down to the court. You see two branches of government, the legislative and the executive, have punted on their responsibilities, their constitutional duties and obligations. And it comes down to a 92-year-old, district judge, Alvin Hellerstein, to decide whether or not this constitutional republic will survive. Because I'm here to tell you right now, if this president, who has 3 more years to serve, gets away with this absolute violation of the law, of the Constitution, if the executive branch can act as a dictatorship with no checks and balances from either the legislative branch or the judicial branch, then this is over for America. We may call ourselves the United States of America. The flag we fly may still be the stars and bars, but it's over. Which brings me to the revolution. And Thomas Jefferson, in 1987, he wrote a letter to William Stevenson, a New York lawmaker, a representative of the state of New York, United States Congress, and he talked about, the birth of the United States. He said, "Look, it's been, we've created a nation of 13 states that have been together for 11 years based upon a single act of rebellion." But he said, you can't expect the people to always be on the ball. Even during the rebellion, the people weren't as informed as they should have been about many issues. And as a result, when you have a people that are not actively engaged in the processes of governance, then the government will begin to behave in a tyrannical fashion. And then it may be time for the people to rise up again. The tree of liberty must be washed in the blood of patriots and tyrants, Thomas Jefferson said. It is the manure of life. The United States has been around for 250 years. On July 4th, we'll celebrate our 250th year of independence. But if Donald Trump gets away with what he has, this is literally the last year we can say we function as a constitutional republic. It is the end of the United States. And then we, the people, have a choice to make. Do we become simply a Roman mob sitting in a Colosseum waiting for the Emperor Caligula to appease whatever base desires we have through violence, through gluttony, through sex? Or do we act as the independent people we are, a people founded in the notion of the rule of law, people who believe in justice, people who believe in a better way of life, people who will not stand the actions of tyrants? Choice will be ours to make in the near future. I hope we don't have to make it. I hope Alvin Hellerstein wins the Battle of New York. And I hope the constitutional republic is restored. But if not, all bets are off. That's been my rant.
Trump kidnaps Nicolas Maduro, bombs Venezuela, and the people who voted for Trump because they believed that he was going to end regime change wars and regime change efforts like this one are celebrating this clear and egregious violation of international law. Y'all know Tim Toole, the devil's favorite fool, Poole, had to give his opinion, saying that the U.S. economy is about to boom, tons of free oil heading our way. But in 2019, ladies and gentlemen, he put ending regime change wars as one of his top 3 issues. And this is while Trump was still in power. Then you got this dumb bastard, Matt Walsh, who might hold the record for the worst opinions on X, saying that he's a reflexive non-interventionist, but then in the same post admits that he believes that America should just run the whole hemisphere and that we should be able to conquer whatever quote unquote dictator we so choose. Bruh. So basically you're not interventionist until it's time to be interventionalist. Like I said, record setter for the worst opinions on X. Then you have Tulsi Gabbard, perhaps the greatest disappointment. Just 2 months ago, talking about how in times recent past, the US was known for toppling governments, regime change, spending millions and millions of dollars on failed regime change efforts. Bro, going as far back as 2019 while Tulsi was running for president herself, she said the United States needs to stay out of Venezuela. And we all know nothing has changed since 2019 up until this point.
For decades, our foreign policy has been trapped in a counterproductive and endless cycle of regime change or nation building. It was a one-size-fits-all approach of toppling regimes, trying to impose our system of governance on others, intervene in conflicts that were barely understood, and walk away with more enemies than allies. President Trump was elected by the American people to put an end to this. From day one, he has showed a very different way to conduct foreign policy.
And the part about this that sticks out the most is where she says, we don't want other countries to choose our leaders, so we have to stop trying to choose theirs. Yeah, we had to put an APB out there for Tulsi because ever since the United States kidnapped Maduro, she has gone completely and totally silent, which is wild because if I just went up on stage and gave a speech about how the president that I worked for is going to end regime change wars and stop regime change efforts, and then he goes out and immediately makes a liar out of me using false intelligence or straight up lies that can only be approved by my department, by the way, because, you know, she's director of national intelligence, I would be the first one to stand up and be like, hey, bro, stop making a liar out of me. Stop making a fool out of me. But instead, she hush. And like I said, what fuels the flames of that fire is the fact that Tulsi specifically mentioned changing out leaders. And we all know that Maria Machado is literally chomping at the bit for the U.S. to put her in power because Maria Machado, even though they pretend that she's super coveted and extremely popular in Venezuela, is actually so unpopular that the U.S. had to literally kidnap the current president of Venezuela for her to sniff an opportunity at the presidential office. But all of a sudden, Tulsi doesn't have anything to say about the U.S. switching out foreign leaders. Bro, even Mr. Anti-globalist himself is coming out and saying that Trump just decapitated the United Nations world government system by overthrowing the country, one of the only countries in the world that doesn't have a Rothschild-controlled central banking system. Then, after rightfully getting called out by his former supporters all over X, he had the audacity to justify Trump's actions using the Monroe Doctrine, which is possibly one of the most globalist policies ever invented. Now, that's just a few examples of what we've seen over social media over the last couple of days, out of many examples. And when you add that to the fake videos being posted, to Trump gaslighting us in interviews, to the fact that Maduro wasn't charged with anything to do with fentanyl in the indictment, I'm just trying to figure out how y'all not more pissed about the fact that these talking heads and these politicians are gaslighting the fuck out of the world, especially their own citizens. Like, I'm all about free speech, but I'm not about speech that is used to justify kidnapping another country's president and stealing their resources after bombing said country, by the way. And I just feel like the only thing that has been more egregious than this blatant violation of international law is the amount of gaslighting that has come out from the people that support it.
on some of the topics that I wanted to discuss with you. What can really be done about this U.S. military operation, and can the United States in any way be held accountable?
Well, according to the Don Road Doctrine and the general ethos expressed by Donald Trump, the only thing that can be done is to deter U.S. aggression, because Donald Trump intends to go well beyond Venezuela and has said this isn't just about Maduro, it's about Cuba, it's about Colombia. He just bombed Nigeria, he's bombing Somalia, he's threatening Iran now, holding out a hat with arch neoconservative Senator Lindsey Graham on Air Force One that says, "Make Iran great again," as former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett urges or even orders Trump to attack Iran. So we're in the law of the jungle now. That's the world that Donald Trump has, I wouldn't say created, but unmasked, because we were probably already there. And countries have no choice but to deter this aggression.
Well, how do you wait? Hold on a second, Max. So how do you deter U.S. aggression, if you will?
The only deterrence that we've seen is Iran's deterrence through its ballistic missiles, which Trump has demanded they give up, or the deterrence of the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, who has nuclearized. This is pretty much the only option that countries have, or to bow to the United States financial
But doesn't that just make
order.
things more confrontational? And I mean, it's sort of a tit for tat situation. How does that solve anything?
Well, it doesn't solve anything, but the United States is a maritime power, and Donald Trump intends to use it to exert his will and the will of his business cronies anywhere they see fit, but specifically in the Western Hemisphere, which he has asserted control and even ownership over through the Don Road Doctrine.
Explain what you mean by the Don Road Doctrine. Our international audience may not know. It's a term that Donald Trump himself used in announcing that operation over the weekend.
Well, the Don Road Doctrine is a cretinous, warmongering interpretation of the Monroe Doctrine invoked by U.S. President James Monroe to prevent the British or other colonial great powers from threatening the United States through Latin America. It did not give the United States control over Latin America, but in Trump's mind, it does. And so the Don Road Doctrine is an international precedent for the United States to kidnap any head of state and put them under trial under phony political charges, or simply assassinate them, as Israel has been doing, if it cannot get its way. And the way is whatever Donald Trump and his business cronies demand, because that goes to the essence of what Donald Trump's golden age is supposed to represent. And I want to address the indictment of Maduro. The indictment of Maduro is a phony, politicized document that would not actually stand up in a real court. It contains allegations of narco-terrorism that were introduced in 2025 relating to incidents that took place sometimes 2 decades ago outside of U.S. jurisdiction, often involving figures who are not Nicolas Maduro. They rely on coerced witnesses and
Max, I'm running out of
would
time.
not hold up under international law. So this is a politicized trial that is intended to justify the Don Road Doctrine as some kind of aggressive enforcement of legal standards, when in fact it's pure lawlessness.
And at the end of the day, what has really changed in Venezuela? I mean, Delcy Rodriguez, a longtime Maduro ally, was either sworn in or is about to sworn in as interim president. She's now leading the government with many Maduro supporters. So what really changed?
Well, there has not been a regime change, but Donald Trump and Marco Rubio believe that they can control Rodriguez and her administration and mete out orders as colonial viceroys. And as Donald Trump has said, if she doesn't obey the United States, she will be next and will suffer a worse fate, suggesting that she will be assassinated. So every country witnessing this right now, if they have the means to deter the United States, they had better get their backs up, because Donald Trump has really lifted the mask on a very dangerous empire and signaled that it will use force to get its way. And it's the way of Trump and the business cronies who have funded his campaigns. And many or most of them are pro-Israel figures like Paul Singer, who now owns Venezuela's largest asset, Citgo.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Max Blumenthal, thank you.
A few hours ago, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev made a statement that shocked the German authorities. In particular, commenting on the kidnapping of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro by the United States, he bluntly stated that Washington's similar actions against a sovereign country had completely untied Russia's hands. Dmitry Medvedev made it clear that Russia reserves the full right to use similar methods against its own enemies. Furthermore, immediately after that, Medvedev admitted that very soon Russia could carry out an operation aimed at kidnapping some of the so-called European leaders, including German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. According to Medvedev, the German Chancellor has committed so many crimes on his conscience that everyone, including German citizens, will be grateful for his kidnapping and sending him to Siberia. The kidnapping of this neo-Nazi Friedrich Merz will be a great plot twist in this carnival show. Even German citizens will thank us for this, Dmitry Medvedev said.
He ain't playing. Medvedev really tired of Putin playing with these people. He won World War III, so he get it.
It is noteworthy that the German authorities reacted very painfully to the words of such a high-ranking Russian politician. In particular, a spokesperson for the German Chancellor, Sebastian Hill, said that such statements against Friedrich Merz are unacceptable. At the same time, he stressed that the German authorities took Medvedev's threats very seriously. Furthermore, Sebastian Hill also said that Friedrich Merz allegedly has an outstanding guard, consisting of employees of the Federal Office for Criminal Cases of Germany. According to him, the German Chancellor is so well protected that any operation to kidnap him is allegedly doomed to complete failure. By the way, many British netizens also commented on Dmitry Medvedev's words about the possible kidnapping of European leaders by Russia. In particular, they asked Dmitry Medvedev to kidnap Keir Starmer and send him to Siberia for life imprisonment. The fact is that British citizens did not like the way Keir Starmer commented on the treacherous US attack on Venezuela and the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro. In particular, Starmer stated that Venezuelan citizens would not mourn Maduro, as he lacked popular support, and was not a politician embraced by the people. British network users noted that British citizens would also not mourn Starmer after his abduction, since the current British Prime Minister does not enjoy wide popularity and support among his own people. Indeed, as of January 2026, Keir Starmer's rating does not exceed 16%. Moreover, the words of the current British Prime Minister were also condemned by many British politicians. In particular, Richard Burgon, a member of the British Parliament, noted that Starmer's words are cowardly, shameful, and reckless. It is also worth noting the words of British politician John McDonnell. According to him, Keir Starmer has once again demonstrated to the world that Britain is a colony of the United States, and that London, on Trump's orders, is willing to overlook violations of international law and the sovereignty of other countries. Meanwhile, on the night of January 6, Russia launched another massive missile strike on Ukraine. This time, independent monitoring services recorded 150 powerful explosions in regions such as Zaporizhia, Chernihiv, Nikolaev, Kharkiv, Transcarpathia, Dnipropetrovsk, and Odessa. It is well known that in these regions, military and logistics facilities have become the main target of Russian missiles and kamikaze drones. For example, in the Chernihiv and Nikolaev regions, Russian ballistic missiles struck a training camp and several airfields, from which Ukrainian army and NATO forces carried out a controlled launch of aircraft-type drones. In the Zaporizhia and Kharkiv regions, the Russian military attacked enemy logistics hubs. As a result, the railway supply of the Ukrainian army in the south and north of the country was disrupted. It is also worth noting the intensification of Russian missile strikes against US-owned facilities in Ukraine. In particular, in the Dnipropetrovsk region, Russian ballistic missiles wiped out the Olena oil extraction plant, owned by the American Bunge Company, from St. Louis. Furthermore, in western Ukraine, in the Transcarpathian region, Russian kamikaze drones, together with ballistic missiles, caused critical damage to the Flex plant, which also belonged to American investors. However, Russian missile attacks on US facilities in Ukraine did not end there. In particular, on the night of January 6, Russia launched a massive missile attack on the American marine terminal Olympex, which is considered the largest in the Odessa region. According to witnesses, even though this facility was protected by Patriot air defense systems, they failed to stop the Russian missiles. Furthermore, the subsequent explosions turned out to be so powerful that a supermassive mushroom cloud arose over Odessa. All this indicates that this marine terminal contained numerous warehouses with NATO weapons. My friends, let me remind you that Zelensky gave the Olympex marine terminal to the United States last summer, as part of the US-Ukraine rare earth mineral deal. At the same time, it is worth noting that this is the second Russian attack on this facility. However, yesterday's Russian missile strike turned out to be so powerful and devastating that it will take months and tens of millions of dollars to restore this marine terminal. In general, it is worth noting that the Odessa seaports only formally belong to Ukraine. Since 2014, the United States, Canada, and Britain have bought the entire port infrastructure facilities of Odessa. In particular, Odessa seaports are owned by American, Canadian, and British companies such as Bunge Limited, Cargill, Viterra, and Lloyd's of London. Thus, as you can see, the regular Russian missile strikes on Odessa threaten not only the supply of Western weapons to the Ukrainian army, but also the financial assets of countries such as the United States, Canada, and Britain. Simply put, Moscow is making it clear to the United States and its so-called allies that their investments in Odessa were in vain, and that sooner or later they will all have to flee Ukraine.
See, I have with me good friend of the show, incredible friend of the show, actually, geopolitical analyst and journalist Pepe Escobar. Pepe, great to be back with you. Thanks for joining.
Hi, Danny. This is a NATO stand to NATO stand greeting, actually. I am on the other part of NATO stand.
Regrettably, I guess, right?
Yesterday was the first snow of the year here. So,
yes, well, winter has come.
Perfect timing to be at home, exactly.
Yes, indeed. Well, winter has come, Pepe, and we are going to talk about now a major, earth-shattering event that is still ongoing. We, of course, had the kidnapping of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro right after the new year. Now we are days after Maduro. Now Maduro has been arraigned in New York, ridiculously. But Venezuela, Pepe, has responded in a pretty big way. And I want to just play a few videos that underscore this. Here we have a major protest in the streets of Caracas right after this occurred. And then this one is even better, Pepe, where you will not intervene in my country. They're saying we will not intervene in my country, and look at just how many people there are there. Listen, little gringo, we are prepared. And this comes, Pepe, as you have events like the opposition, for example, in Venezuela, standing with the ruling party in solidarity during the opening of the parliament. And then I think even more interestingly enough, you have Diosdado Cabello, the interior minister, in the streets last night. There was a little bit of drone activity. I guess there was some kind of friendly fire going on, not connected to the United States, but the militias are out, Pepe, and they have not only declared a national emergency, but are actively searching for any collaborators. But I wanted to ask you, these are major responses by Venezuela. Delcy Rodriguez is now the president. There's been a lot of speculation about stand-down orders by the military, Delcy maybe being part of the betrayal, all of this speculation. But so far, what I've seen is Venezuelans and the Venezuelan government responding in a pretty big way that doesn't equal capitulation. So how did we get here?
On the contrary, but that's, as you know, Danny, and all of you, our audience, the CIA are not very good at understanding local reality. They are very good at bribing people with loads of cash. This is what many of us have seen. I've seen in person in many parts of the world. Well, the response was predictable because Chavismo is deeply rooted in Venezuelan society, not only in the countryside, among the campesinos, but in many of the big cities and even in a great deal of Caracas. Caracas is where you find the 0.1% of Venezuela society, equivalent to the 0.1% who lives in Miami. Miami is, of course, the capital of the Venezuelan diaspora, and Miami Venezuelans in Miami, like Cubans in Miami, fully support the new self-declared viceroy of Venezuela, El Gusano Marco Rubio. But for instance, yesterday I was sent a video shot among the campesinos, and it's absolutely extraordinary. You see average Venezuelans work in the countryside, absolutely furious about the whole thing, and we're going to resist. We'll never be slaves again. So this is the mood in deep Venezuela, which is much more realistic than just looking at a few neighborhoods in Caracas. It's not even Caracas as a whole. Caracas, like most big South American cities, they have enormous favelas. And in these favelas, everybody is a Chavista. And in lower middle class neighborhoods, everybody is a Chavista. So this is something that comes since Chavez was in power. So it's over 20 years. It's almost 25 years of solidifying a vision with all its problems. Nobody is saying that Chavismo is not corrupt, or it has many, I would say, conceptual faults as well. But the most important thing is that not only Chavez in the first few years, they explain to the overwhelming majority of the Venezuelan population what it means to have a socialist-tinged government in their country compared to the exploitation that came before by these 1% Venezuelan elites. And this has passed from generation to generation. So the sons of Chavismo today, and some of them are in the parliament, some of them are in power as well, and some of them are business leaders. They understand the fundamental concepts, of course. As with everywhere, I won't even start talking about the United States, for instance, corruption is everywhere. And obviously, corruption was part of the, let's put it between commas, success so far of the 30-minute plus, maximum 30-minute American operation. This is an enormously complex problem because so far we only have speculation, period. But one thing we can already say with certainty, and I'll put my hat on the ring and I'll say it myself as well. There was no deal between Delcy, now interim president, and the Trump administration, period. This is an extremely sophisticated PSYOPs campaign, and a lot of people, even progressives all around the global south, are falling for it. No. What happened is Delcy had to talk to somebody on Trump 2.0, and she did talk to Marco Rubio. They had phone calls, and of course, she is the number 2 in the line of power, and the Americans needed to talk to somebody. There was one phone call between a recorder, as far as we know, between Maduro and Trump himself. So obviously, there were talks. This doesn't mean anything, of course. But the most important thing is who betrayed Maduro in the end, which is the gigantic open question. We are piecing the puzzle bit by bit, let's say 72 hours today, right? So what was sure after less than 48 hours was that the American narrative was already falling apart. The thing that this was very smooth and it was not a problem at all. No. That's not what happened. Because after the first 48 hours, we start to have from Venezuela, starting with Cabello, the minister, to soldiers giving interviews to Venezuelan media, saying that what really happened around the palace was a very complicated mix of an impromptu raid, of course, but with internal support. So we know for sure now that several members of the security circle of Maduro, including his chief of security, was bribed by the Americans. By the way, the security chief was caught and killed on the spot a few minutes after the raid. Very, very important. We know that 32 or maybe 34 Cuban special forces were also killed. Nobody knows by whom. This was officially recognized by Havana. This was also recognized by the current administration in Caracas. But so far, we don't know how did they get killed. Were they killed by the Delta Force commandos, or were they killed by the traders who were already installed over there in the palace and, let's say, opened the doors for the Americans? Only speculation. Nobody knows for sure.
Right.
Delcy, very, very important. Delcy is I would say, a Chavista of the first hour, if we could put it this way. She's the daughter of a slain Chavista revolutionary. That's very, very important. I saw her in forum, some in Russia, in fact. She has a very, very good relationship with Lavrov. They joke together. They see each other all the time. The Chinese respect Delcy a lot as well, even more than the normal Chinese diplomatic respect, you know. So Delcy is highly respected because she's very, very competent. And she has, of course, that Venezuelan swing. It helps, right? She enters a room, she makes friends with everybody instantly. So obviously, the Americans needed a scapegoat, the main scapegoat for who betrayed Maduro narrative. But they picked the wrong person. They could have gone after Diosdado Cabello or after the Minister of the Interior. No, these are ultra Chavistas. So, and Delcy is even more Chavista than all of them. So this doesn't cut it. Okay, how it worked? Well, the Joint Chiefs of Staff is saying, they said it on the record, that they blinded Venezuelan air defenses. We can take that at face value, or we can say that they, once again, that they are lying. We don't know. Nobody knows. So it's also speculation. It would, of course, play to all of those who are saying that first they were blinded and then they were betrayed from the inside. It's much more complicated than that. The possibility of a stand-down order is still in the air because we could not get, none of us, including everybody that we know in Venezuela, on the ground in Venezuela. And we were discussing this with some of our friends yesterday. They said, look, it's absolutely impossible to know if there was a standout order, who gave it? Where did it come from? Or considering this was 2, 3 in the morning on a Friday night to Saturday, and everybody was either drunk or in bed, or their defenses were down, etc., contributed to it. Yes, of course it did. But the fact that apparently only one IGLA man pad of 5,000 that the Venezuelans got from the Russians was launched, there's no explanation for that so far.
Right.
So we are up in the air on so many levels. The most important, I think, then is what you stressed right in the beginning of the show. Everybody literally in Venezuela knows that this is beyond abhorrent. And people who know a little bit about South America, and if you speak a little bit of Spanish, if you understand the intricacies of the language, how they use language, if you understand a little bit of how people in the Caribbean, in Venezuela, in Colombia, Ecuador, further down, how they think, the video of Maduro at the court in New York saying explicitly, I consider myself a prisoner of war, and I was arrested at my house in Caracas. None of you has any idea how strong this is going to play around everywhere in South America and in Latin America as a whole. This is very, very strong on a popular level. You see, this is how it's going to be played in the streets of Rio, in the streets of even Buenos Aires, in the periphery of Buenos Aires, in the mountains in La Paz. People immediately recognize what this means. So we can say that the Neo-Caligula, he bought a fight with practically the whole of Latin America, apart from their comprador, fifth columnist elites. Let's see if he has the balls to keep going. And then, of course, it gets much more complicated, Danny, as we know. The oil angle, the don't roll doctrine angle, how he is applying it, the rare earths and immense natural resources angle, the anti-China, anti-Russia, anti-Iran angle. Of course, everything is interconnected. But if, and considering the personality of the megalomaniac narcissist Neo-Caligula, if he thought that this would be an easy World Wrestling Federation kind of PR photo op, no. This is just the beginning of what could be hell for his administration in the long run, depending how he actualizes what he promised. I wouldn't say he promised the United States, but he promised his MAGA followers. I now own Venezuela. You own it. You break it. You own it. Let's see how you're going to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Pepe, I wanted to bring up your article now, Barbaria Strikes Again, because I think you really outlined from start to finish exactly how we got here from start to finish. And what I find so striking about this moment, Pepe, is despite all the bluster, despite all the rhetoric, Trump saying that he owns the hemisphere, he controls Venezuela, yes. He controls the oil. They seemingly were forced, and now mainstream media is bringing this up, they were forced to choose, quote unquote, I don't know if this is even a choice or not, but they were forced to go along with Delcy Rodriguez being the leader, despite the fact that now the CIA, now the mainstream media, they're all saying, this might not work out exactly how Trump is saying it already is. So talk about how your piece helps illuminate this big, I think, conundrum, this big contradiction with all of the bluster and the success of the operation and the humiliation that they're trying to do of Maduro versus maybe their own kind of humiliation right now, which is the Bolivarian government still standing. And you heard Delcy, right? This has a Zionist tinge to it. Free Maduro. We will not be slaves again. This doesn't sound like bowing down.
Exactly. And this is the heart of the whole matter is the president of the United States managed to organize a kidnapping of a sitting head of state and take him to New York on absolutely ridiculous charges. But he didn't get the most important thing. He didn't get a regime change. So considering that the CIA spooks are not exactly geopolitical eminences, right? Obviously, they never thought about that. And considering that the people around Trump, if we look at El Gusano Marco Rubio, oh my God, in terms of geopolitics, he is not exactly the new Talleyrand, right? Obviously, they never thought about the aftermath. So obviously, they were, from the beginning, concentrated on a show. Once again, putting on a show with no strategic, without analyzing the strategic consequences of all that. And it's very easy if you are in the State Department and you order your underlings, okay, now you do a poster with the president and you write, we own the hemisphere. Okay, that plays very well on X for 10 seconds. Okay, and what are you going to do to enforce that? Are you ready to subjugate the whole of Latin America with boots on the ground? So they are going to follow your imperial will? No, you won't. First of all, because you don't know how to do it. The Pentagon cannot fight a boots on the ground war against anybody anywhere. Number one. Number two, if they did, American casualties would be enormous. And we all know what that means in terms of domestic American opinion. Number three, this would have to have been coordinated between the intel apparatus and, of course, the Pentagon. And obviously, it was not. Number four, this all the whole thing is subordinated to the megalomaniacal whims of the Neo-Caligula and, of course, his viceroy of Venezuela, who finally has his first so-called victory on the ground, and he's already thinking about Cuba and Nicaragua. So when you look at all that, obviously, it's like a child's game with absolutely no strategy. The only thing that then it gets a little more, it gets trickier. If this was organized as a way of sending a message to Russia, China, and Iran, Russia, China, and Iran are not exactly impressed with what they've seen. They are already, of course, denouncing in all the appropriate channels, including the UN Security Council, that this was basically a kidnapping executed by a bunch of mini gangsters. How they're going to react is in the long term. And it's very, very interesting, Danny, because some of us started discussing another alternative scenario yesterday. And of course, we are all free to discuss alternative scenarios because nobody knows exactly what happened. What if Russia and China induced Trump into this particular trap? That's quite possible. They let it happen. They don't forget, first of all, Russia and China think geopolitics several chessboard moves ahead. And they work in close cooperation. So when they looked at Venezuela, where they both have energy interests, weapons transfers interests, economic interests, geopolitical projection interests, and they all converge, coalesce, they run in parallel, etc., but they are not contradictory. They could have devised, okay, let's attract this absolutely volatile character into a trap. And when he's inside the trap, he won't be able to extricate himself because he's going to lose face. So they know how to deal with a megalomaniac narcissist. It's very, very easy. The last thing a megalomaniac narcissist wants is to lose face and to be ridiculed by everyone. He's already being ridiculed all over the global south. He's already being ridiculed all over Latin America. Soon he will inside the United States, right?
Yes.
So this is already happening. So, our scenario gets more and more plausible when we look of how, without doing absolutely anything, Russia and China may have prompted the president of the United States to commit a tremendous geopolitical mistake. So we have to keep this in mind all the time. I was particularly struck by the relatively mild responses by both Moscow and Beijing. They were pro forma. There was nothing like, wow, oh, the horror. No, they were very cool, calm, calculated. Okay, this is horrible, etc. We're going to fight against it. He has to return Maduro to Venezuela, etc. But that was it. So I love the idea that there's much more to it than just, he was powerful enough to send a message to Russia and China. Russia and China looked at it and said, oh, we're going to have to abandon all our deals in Venezuela and the Caribbean, because otherwise, Neo Caligula is going to be very mad at us. It doesn't work like this.
Right. It's all over the mainstream media, though. There's that narrative that's being promoted, and then there's the other narrative of, oh, well, this is going to embolden, because there's some panic, I think, in CIA circles. Oh, this is going to embolden Russia and China to, harbin their spheres of influence, right? Their so-called spheres of influence. This is the lens that they're looking at out of it as either what you're saying or that.
And then all this stupidity going around the net that Russia and China didn't do anything to save Venezuela. It doesn't, hardcore geopolitics at the highest power politics level doesn't work like this.
Yeah.
When something like this happens, mega players, especially working together with Russia and China, they knew that this was one of the possible scenarios. And that brings us back to that, for the moment, hypothetical scenario. Okay, let it happen. Let's see how he deals with it if it happens. Because it's obviously a trap. Trump now is in the middle of a gigantic trap, and he won't be able to sell this as a victory starting in the next few days, in fact. Well, first of all, can you imagine the Department of Justice goes on the record saying, look, the Cartel de los Soles never existed.
Never exists. That's the whole case. I mean, Maduro, you saw him in court. He said this, or we didn't get to see it, but we heard all of the reports. He said, I just got the indictment now. I want to read it in my own time. Like that, but that whole indictment, which is ridiculous on its face already, it's now out of the window. And now they're saying cocaine,
possession of weapons, cocaine, whatever. So it's already, it's in farce territory already. Huh? Well, the oil angle, very, very important. There is absolutely no way that American oil companies are going to be on a flight to Caracas tomorrow and take over of the whole oil industry of Venezuela. Forget it. This is going to take years. And if we look at the predecessors, what happened to the Iraq oil industry and what happened to the Libyan oil industry, it took in both cases around 10 years to get to the same level of production before shock and awe and before the killing of Gaddafi. And very, very important to consider, the big oil doesn't share Trump's dream of making.
That's what I wanted to pull up, because as you're saying,
you're right.
Literally, this is what the oil corporations are
because they already
themselves.
They did the math already, Danny, and they saw that it's absolutely impossible, and they have to invest money that they don't have for 10 years to start getting
something like $18 billion of their own money or something.
Exactly. So in 10 years, they're going to get Venezuela producing what, 3 million barrels, between 3 and 3.5 million barrels a day. It's completely absurd.
With the worry of nationalization. I mean, they already know what has happened in Venezuela, which is
they already know what happened.
The people want their own oil. So that's what happened and what's happening. And if you reverse that, who's to say it's not going to happen again?
Exactly. I included in my column what Miguel Tinker Salas said a few days ago, in fact, how Venezuela nationalized their oil already in the 70s. And everybody was paid. So another Trump fiction. They stole our oil. So, but he can get away with anything because there's no more, as we all know, there's no more investigative journalism in the US, and nobody steps up and say, Mr. President, you're lying. Well, okay, so the oil angle is going to be enormously complicated. So if you're sending a message to Russia, once again, to Russia, China, Iran, and everybody else that all the oil in Latin America has to be dealt with in petrodollars. Okay, that's closer to the mark. Are the BRICS going to be very impressed about that? No, especially the Chinese. First of all, because many of the Chinese customers are already selling oil in petro yuan, and this is inevitable, including Emirates and Saudi Arabia. It's also inevitable. Emirates, part of the BRICS as well. Saudi Arabia still, but the Chinese already told the Saudis a while ago, okay, there will come a time when all the oil sellers will be petro yuan. That's it. And if that's not it, you lose us as a customer. And Saudi Arabia cannot afford to lose China as a customer. So this message will be in the air for everybody. So it's up to BRICS Plus, and it's up to OPEC Plus to follow it or not. There's no guarantee they're going to be intimidated. On the contrary. And that, then, it brings us to maybe the most explosive geopolitical ramification of it all, which is, are the BRICS finally going to step up their game after seeing what happened now? Well, I prefer to leave it in the open and in the balance, because when we look at the composition of BRICS, I would say that the BRICS Partners Club is even more cohesive than the 10 BRICS sitting at the BRICS table. When you have, for instance, gangsters like the United Arab Emirates on the table, and you have the unresolvable differences between India and China, always mediated by Russia, and when you have Brazil under Lula, maybe not for too long, the extreme right might be back in power in Brazil in the next elections. And even if Lula wins the next elections, Lula is a one-man show who doesn't want to go back to jail, and under a lot of pressure, capable, because of his Ministry of Foreign Relations, of extremely cowardly decisions. One of them was veto the entry of Venezuela into BRICS before the summit in Kazan in October 2024. So Lula will have to live with that. He is partially responsible for what happened. His cowardice, and his cowardice because of the recommendations that he got from his pathetic Ministry of Foreign Relations. So when you have all that sitting on the BRICS table, it's going to be very hard to get a consensus on, okay, let's accelerate everything that we are testing in terms of alternative payment systems. Let's start thinking of dealing among us and including our energy trade in our own currencies. Once again, this is not the BRICS currency yet. This is a long way away. One of our friends, the former the co-founder of the NDB, the BRICS banks, Paulo Nogueira Batista, a very good friend of ours, he is working on a paper about how to get one day to a BRICS-based, I wouldn't say currency, but system of payment, exactly. There are 3 or 4 different projects being studied and tested inside BRICS as well. So, but this will be, of course, what happened now will be accelerated. There are some other very, very important developments. Sberbank, the #1 bank in Russia, their volume of business, to give you an idea, all of you, our audience, only JP Morgan moves more money than Sberbank in Russia. So we're talking about a major powerhouse, you know. They are starting to think of we need to have a cyber security system for the whole of BRICS. So this is going to pick up speed this year, all the way to the summit in India at the end of the year. And of course, most of all, how do we organize a sound geopolitical counterpunch to the empire completely out of control without making the empire getting even more out of control? This is the #1 problem. And nobody in BRICS still has this answer. Russia and China, they're going to take their time to digest what happened, what is unrolling in Venezuela. It's not what happened, what is unrolling and what could happen in Venezuela. And they will be the first 2 to extract the basic lessons, and then sitting at the table with BRICS and also sitting at the table with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Okay, we're going to have to tweak our multilateral organizations to deal with an empire which is now completely out of control, even though they say, of course, between commas, that they only want to own the Western Hemisphere. This is what they say, but it's that they want to keep having their nodes of control all around the planet, including, of course, Asia Pacific, not Indo-Pacific because it doesn't exist, as we all know. Asia Pacific. So Russia and China are very much alert to all that. As for the future of Venezuela, we cannot expect in the short term or even medium term any concerted Latin American action, apart from outrage in the South American, Latin American street. Most of their elites and most of their governments are either totally corrupt or fifth columnists for the West, like Argentina and the new government in Chile. And the ones who are not, the empire is going to go after them. It has already been telegraphed by Narcissus himself. He's going after Colombia, he's going after Mexico, if they don't behave, just like they'll see. They'll see, if you don't behave, I'm going to bomb Venezuela again.
Politico says that Trump has her on a short leash. That's the... I mean, this is how they're talking about it, as if that's supposed to convince us everything is going the way they want it to. But continue.
Well, it's Danny and all of you, it's narrative. The only thing that the empire does with the capabilities of a very well organized Netflix series is build narratives. Yeah. Nobody builds narratives better than the empire. And of course, selected kidnapping and corrupting and bribing operations like we just saw. Very, very important. And this was revealed by one of the soldiers, Danny, one of the Venezuelan soldiers in one of the bases. He told a Venezuelan media that the Americans were trying to establish a beachhead in one of these bases to organize a sort of landing over there. And they couldn't because there was resistance by these soldiers were not compromised at all, on the contrary. So the Americans, and he said in his own word, so the Americans had to flee. So this is an absolutely essential piece of information from a participant, on the ground witness, a fighter, and a Chavista fighter. Very, very important. So the plan was not only to kidnap Maduro. The plan was to organize a mini Bay of Pigs kind of operation, which, as the CIA is a master in these kinds of operations, failed miserably.
Definitely, it definitely failed miserably. And I think this, when we look at, I want to pull this up, the fact that the Trump administration is not even pushing at all for elections, not even at all. Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, they've all said, no, there's not going to be elections anytime soon. They're not even looking at Venezuela's own constitution, which I believe sometime down the road, the interim president does have to call elections at some point. But these are very special circumstances too. So everything could be in flux. But nonetheless, this is the reality. You said no strategy earlier, Pepe. And then you were talking about the trap. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about that. Russia and China.
Yeah.
At times, I think that there was not even any need. A trap can be it's going to happen, and you let it happen because and I think this is a big part of this no election campaign talking point by the Trump administration. I think everybody knows that the Venezuelan people, which tend to be very impactful when it comes to regime change, you need people to support it. You need people to at least stand down. I think they know there's not going to be any standing down. And that's exactly what's been happening. So, yeah, Pepe, your reaction.
Yes, look, I want to read to you and to all of you, our audience, the three basic demands by Trump himself and by the Viceroy Rubio directly to DLC. And basically they were saying, they'll see if you don't follow what we're ordering you to do, there's going to be a second strike against Venezuela, especially if you don't cooperate in the oil front. So number one, crack down on drug trafficking flows. This is completely absurd because the flows, they don't go through Venezuela. They're from Colombia and from Mexico. So DLC is going to have to pick up the phone and talk to Petro and Scheinbaum and say, look, the Viceroy is ordering us to stop the cartels, which, of course, are working directly with the Americans. Completely absurd. Totally stupid. Number two, and this is quite predictable, expel Iranian, Cuban, and other, between commas, operatives hostile to Washington. I look, this is going to be quite something, can you imagine watching on TV plane loads of Cubans being expelled by Delcy Rodriguez and the new government from Venezuela just because the Neo-Caligula ordered her to do so? Not going.
You mean those Cubans, Pepe, that are like providing healthcare,
providing healthcare, Cuban doctors, you name it.
Yeah, they're just gonna expel them, sure.
Yeah, just expel. And number three, and that's the killer: halt oil sales to U.S. adversaries. We all know who they are, right? This is gonna be fantastic. So today I posted on X a fascinating map of dozens of oil tankers from everywhere moving around the Venezuela coast, landing to, of course, transport oil out of Venezuela. Exactly, Reuters said about a dozen oil tankers, maybe even more if you look at the map. Absolutely. So we see oil tankers from everywhere, including China, of course, but other BRICS members, maybe Brazil and Mexico as well, and India, certainly, already completely smashing the Trump blockade right in front of everybody. And now this is common knowledge. So they cannot even enforce their own blockade. So they are being humiliated already on a daily basis, not only by this breaking of the blockade, but by everything that the Venezuelan campesinos and people, the majority of the population in Caracas, and the members of the whole Chavista apparatus are basically telling Trump, you think you won anything, you're going to have to come here with boots on the ground to conquer our land. And then you're going to see what is the real deal. So, not only the narrative started collapsing 48 hours, in the first 72 hours, it's practically completely collapsed, including when we consider the opinion of the CEOs of American oil companies themselves. So what is left of all this? A mini Netflix series with only 3 episodes, with no season 2.
Yeah. I mean, and it, the really what I find to be almost amusing, and I know there's a lot to come, and maybe, you shouldn't take it as so amusingly, but what I find amusing, Pepe, is that the whole no election strategy, don't push anyone new, keep Delcy in there. What are they saying? Oh, she's the right one to stabilize the oil markets. And the only way you can stabilize oil in Venezuela is if what we just showed, tankers can pass. You don't get into confrontations with them because Venezuela needs to trade oil to have their economy is stable. Their economy grew 6% over the last year. It has been relatively stable. If you don't want that to, if you don't want Venezuela to crash, then you're gonna have to let it happen. So all of this bravado and bluster essentially looks like Nicolas Maduro has been kidnapped, and that's horrible. And we, of course, abhor that. But that's really all we see right now is that they took Maduro, and everything else is the same. Everything else has remained the same, other than
absolutely
Venezuelans are pissed. The government is uniting. Opposition, even opposition forces are uniting.
The parliament,
a lot of consequences.
Parliament is united, exactly. The population, we can say with certainty, 98% of the population is united. There's only that 1-2% in Caracas, essentially. And of course, the diaspora. The diaspora doesn't count. They're not even in Venezuela. Most of them have American passports, in fact. They don't even use their Venezuelan passport anymore. There was one angle that I was also thinking about. Of course, the non-reaction, and there cannot have a very incisive reaction across Latin America because of the fifth columns and the entreguista comprador elites in many of these governments. But in terms of the population of the global south, this was as a wake-up call for the whole global south. This was priceless because now things are crystal clear and out in the open. So in terms of political organization, the onus now is in nation states across the global south and multilateral organizations to really organize a geopolitical and also geoeconomic response to an empire completely out of control. So this, if we could find on a Chinese angle, an auspicious point in the middle of this horror story, which I was trying to use humor, a little bit of swing, Danny and all of you. This is a very South American thing. South Americans are masters of dealing with horrors, with jokes, with swing, with, balance, with dance. The same Maduro dance that apparently rendered Neo Caligula furious because Maduro has the moves. He doesn't. So it's amazing when you look at this, little details of everyday life, but they count a lot.
Salute, soldier.
And the people all across South America, different latitudes, if you talk to a Porteño in Buenos Aires, a Brazilian in the Northeast, a Peruvian, or, especially Colombians and Venezuelans are very, very proud of their Bolivarian roots. This element of sense of humor, swing, and, joking about the horrors is very prominent. It's something that a regimented culture from the North could never understand. And of course, improvisation. If everything goes to shit in Venezuela, the population will find ways to improvise something out of the blue. If ever the Americans dared an invasion of Venezuela, oh man, then Vietnam compared to it would be a real joke. Of course, they won't dare because this was all gamed by the Pentagon and it's out of the question. Topology, geography, etc., and cohesion of the people living in the countryside, you name it. And buying the elites is very, very easy. But buying the elites with what, once again, what's the strategy long term? You want to have elites in Venezuela like you had before Chavismo, basically exploiting the country at will. It's not going to happen. The population is already telling the Americans now, forget it, we'll never be slaves again. So how are you going to control a country of, how many, 28 million? Correct me if I'm wrong, the total population.
I think it's about that.
I think it's around 28 million or so. You can't. You simply can't. And once again, coming back to the oil, it's going to take at least 10 years to the same production levels that they had 10 years ago. So what is this for? Once again, it's to prove that I am macho man. Yes, that's number one, right? To intimidate Russia and China out of Latin America, no, they won't be intimidated. Another thing that I was discussing with some of our friends yesterday, China is going to take, if contracts are not respected by the new, let's say, American government, ersatz American government, we're not talking about Bill C, if they come up with somebody else. If contracts with China are not respected, China is going to take them to court. And this is the only thing that really scares the imperial mentality as a whole, to be sued. So they will be sued en masse by the Chinese, by the Russians, by everybody else. So they don't want that as well.
And Venezuelan people will be very unhappy because of the fact that that's a lot of revenue you're giving up. And it's a lot of revenue you're giving up if you're saying no Russia, no China, no Iran. That's basically all the revenue since the sanctions, right? It's a big part of. Yeah, well, Pepe, I wanted to, before moving on to one last segment, I did want to show this. Here's Delcy while being sworn in. These figures that she's hugging. The Chinese ambassador, the Russian ambassador,
and Iranian. The first three. This is immense. And don't forget, Danny and all of you, these images are all over Venezuela. Everybody in Venezuela looks at these images, and the conclusion is immediate. There you go.
Yeah, totally. And then, in your article, Pepe, I wanted to actually review this with you while I have you, because I think it's really important. You did mention it in brief, but let's get into some of the bigger details here. I wanted to just pull it up first. Your Barbaria strikes again. You talk about this article in the Miami Herald, which uses a single source to basically spread a fiction that Delcy Rodriguez made a pact with Trump to hand Nicolas Maduro over. And I want to put this in the context.
Source, Danny, very important. This was the number one source that was spread out everywhere in American mainstream media and on X.
Yep, exactly. And a lot of people were saying this is smoking gun, even Consortium News, who I respect a lot, and people should support Consortium News.
Well, that's Peter, come on. They are our friends. They should have known. Or
They
should
republished the article. Yeah.
Venezuela. Oh, that's
So,
big.
yeah, so it was republished, not in full, but it was commented on almost as fact, which to me is an error. But it comes in the context of what is even Nicolas Maduro's very brave, I would say, stand amidst all of this. I don't know if you saw. I didn't even know this until recently, that what hand signal he was giving. People were joking about the signals he was giving to cameras. Well, one of the men's actually, "We will be victorious," and he was sending. It seemed like he was sending a message directly to the Venezuelan people, knowing that he would be, of course, recorded over and over and over again and seen. And then you posted. Hold on, one last photo. I want to say you posted this one. That was republished by Telesur, where
it was everywhere in Venezuela. Yeah.
His comments: "I am the president of Venezuela, and I consider myself a prisoner of war. I was captured. I was kidnapped from my house in Caracas." Those were his words at the arraignment, and they have went viral. So, Pepe, your thoughts about all of this?
Very important, Danny, and all of you. The sign that he made, one of our Venezuelan colleagues, he says, "Look, this sign was on a Chavez Nasrallah level." This means that everybody in Venezuela understands this sign. And you don't need words. It's just a sign. And it's up there. It's a sign of we are together. See? So now it takes balls. And obviously, can you imagine if DEA agents in New York have any idea what this sign means? Obviously not.
No.
So once again, these elements of they lighten up the intrinsic horror of the narrative, and that's something very South American. You deal with supreme adversity, but there's always a way out, and there's always a way to, send the message to the people around. Look, it's okay. It's gonna work. That's extremely impressive, and that's the secret of communitarian spirit. This is something that if you explain, for instance, to the Chinese, they will understand it instinctively, even if they don't understand the signs or they don't understand the language or the culture. Doesn't matter. They understand conceptually what that means, So once again, this is maybe a little bit of light in the end of we are in the beginning of the tunnel at the moment, no? And I am particularly very worried about the BRICS response, which I think will be none. Not because of Russia and China, but because of the others. And of course, we have to be very, very attentive to the next Russian moves. Because don't forget that this was practically simultaneous with the 91 drone attack on the Novgorod command center.
Yeah, we can't even get to that given all this, but yes.
We can't even get to that, but okay. But we can make the direct connection, which is also one of Putin's residences in the Novgorod area. Very, very important thing, which many of us outlined, is that the military attaché of the US was summoned to the Ministry of Defense in Moscow, where he was handed over evidence that the US was directly involved in this drone attack. So obviously the whole planet will be asking the question, was Trump in? Did he know about it? And who gave the final order? Just speculation, but I'm sure many of you, our audience, you have your very solid theories about it. So that will, what we are sure is that will reorient, to be very diplomatic from now on, the Russian negotiating position vis-a-vis Ukraine. That's for sure. We don't know which way this will go, but it's going to be a completely different ball game. And obviously, we can also more or less infer that the role of Dmitriev, Jared Kushner, oh my God, and Witkoff from now on is going to become smaller and smaller. So we have to pay very close attention to these next few weeks. Of course, the Russians never do that without carefully considering all the possibilities on the scenarios. But something very, very serious changed in Moscow after this attack. Very serious, very, very serious. It's just the beginning of another tunnel. And once again, Danny, we don't know where this tunnel is going to lead.
I mean, it's this moment, Pepe, right at the beginning of 2026, we had that happen right before it. And then we, of course, have even the situation in Iran, which is openly the Trump administration and Israel are both openly supporting the color revolution protests, which I don't believe are
already died, by the way.
Yeah, it's already died.
They died this past 24 hours. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and they're openly talking about, okay, well, maybe an attack soon. I mean, it's completely unhinged. But also, Pepe, when it comes to like Russia and China, for example, when they see something like what happened in Venezuela, they made very strong statements, as we've referenced, regarding the emergency UN Security Council meeting that was called, I believe, by Colombia and supported by Russia and China. Very strong words by Nebenzia.
Right.
Bell now tolls the future of the United Nations. It's the United Nations itself. He was referencing.
I love the Hemingway metaphor. The bell now tolls. That's very chic.
Talking about Washington's true aim of unbridled control of Venezuela, harbinger of lawlessness. That's what U.S. domination really is. There's no justification. Free Maduro and Celia, of course. And then China. Very similar. Very similar.
Very similar. Exactly. It's similar. Of course.
And so, given this too, it's like both of these countries as well. They look at what happened in Venezuela, and they're going to say, "Why would we loosen our own positions vis-a-vis the United States?" Which is what Donald Trump ultimately wants. Isn't this what he does? Right? Art of the deal. Threaten. Bully. And then you're going to want to talk to me. You're going to want to communicate with me. Well. Seems like Russia and China too only have reasons to do the opposite of that, to be very cautious, if not, antagonistic towards such a thing.
No, not antagonistic. They will be even more cautious than they were before, but they're going to, let's say, improve the manage. In fact, how to contain Trump. A containment of the Neo-Caligula strategy. They're going to tweak this strategy from now on, in close coordination. Very, very important. Well, I'll be in China and Russia soon. First in China and then in Russia. So in a month from now, I'm going to have a deeper appreciation of what this is going. For instance, today I was reading some of my favorite Chinese sources of info. They have been very circumspect, not antagonistic. They are not judging the kidnapping operation per se. They are not judging they are trying to, okay, what does he want to do with that? They're trying to get to the motives, but all the academics and the experts that are read, nobody has a deeper understanding. For instance, they rarely mention China in terms of Trump's calculations. So the Chinese are being very prudent for the moment. The Russians, that was very interesting because in the beginning there was total silence from Moscow. And then, of course, we started to listen to especially Medvedev and at the UN, Nebenzia. Nebenzia is, of course, is at the highest level, and he's very incisive and he's very respected at the UN floor. But it's not that the Russians are expressing outrage, no. And it's not that the Chinese are expressing enormous outrage, no. So this points to them, let's coldly analyze the facts, and especially the known facts. Let's decode this narrative, dissect this narrative, and then we're going to tweak our containment strategy. Because now it's obvious to both Moscow and Beijing that they need even more a coordinated containment strategy against an administration completely out of control. So that at least is number one lesson in all that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, as we begin to, close out here, Pepe, in the last 5 minutes or so, I wanted to pull up just some last comments on, we talked about that symbol that was thrown up. Jorge Rodriguez, who is the brother of Delcy Rodriguez, he threw it up during Parliament. And then, of course, we had Maduro's son. And I'm playing these because I think that there's something really, too, that we often don't get to talk about in geopolitics a lot, which is...
It's enormous. I'm glad that you're doing it, because I don't think anybody else is doing it this way,
right,
apart from the Venezuelans. Yeah.
Right. The people factor, right? Like, we have the people factor. We have what such a thing does when, unlike a lot of people want to make the Syria comparison, a lot of people want to make comparisons to different things, but it's a different context and a different situation. And they messed with a population that is very much with not only their leader, but what the leader represents. Here is President Maduro's son at Parliament. It's in Spanish, but I can read it as best I can. I can't invoke his emotions.
If you need it, I can translate for you. It's okay.
Oh, yeah. So,
yeah, we're carrying on until yeah, it's a good translation of what he's saying.
So this was him talking about we'll carry on.
It's a literal translation.
And soon we'll embrace here in Venezuela. You'll see the boys, Celia. You'll see them. We'll see each other. Long live Venezuela. But these comments, we are firm. We're ready to do whatever we want to do with our home. That's in the National Assembly. I mean, he's speaking to
and language is essential. He says, "Nos vamos a ver." Nos vamos a ver means we, including Maduro, are going to see your family. So this is enormous. And when you say that in the floor, it's every TV all across Venezuela, people are watching that. Wow. You simply cannot go, no narrative can perforate that, out of the question.
Yeah, and in the U.S. and in the West, right, it might be hard to understand the impact of this, given that it may not lead to Maduro actually being able to return. We don't know, but it actually could be worse. If Maduro does get in prison, does stay in prison, if this it's going to drag on for months and months, right? Because the first hearing is what, 90 days from the arraignment.
March 17, the first hearing, but this is going to drag forever. Yeah.
So we're talking about something that will drag on. What does that do, Pepe, then to Venezuelan people who this wound that the Trump administration did land on them continues to be open, And what does that do for them, Pepe? Your comments on this?
And not only for Venezuelans, but for the overwhelming population of not only South America, but Latin America as a whole. This is, the power of these words by his son, by Delcy, it's enormous. And combined with the science, wow. This is what people's power is capable of. It's something that in most northern latitudes, people have no idea. Maybe it used to be like this in several European countries, but the eons are not anymore. And but this is people power in action.
Yeah.
Instinctively, even if you don't have you don't need a PhD in Harvard to understand that, It's instinctive. It's a communal experience. It's a sentiment that everybody shares, that their dignity and their honor, and of course the homeland, has been, stabbed in the back, and it's up to them to resist. So this is another, I would say, facet of the overall theme of resistance that we have been applying lately to Gaza, to Palestine, to Yemen, and now we are applying again to South America.
Yeah.
And the conditions are very different from the past, Danny and all of you. For instance, I come from a generation where, when I was a kid, there was a military coup in the country where I was born. And it took Brazil 20 whatever years to get rid of this military dictatorship. Of course, the coup was organized by the Americans. Who else? And when I was in college, it was Allende in 73 in Chile. I remember all of us in my university say, look, let's go to Chile and defend them. Can you imagine Brazilians going to the other side of South America to defend our Chilean friends? With what? David Bowie records. We didn't have anything. We didn't have weapons. But you could feel this, especially among campesinos on both sides of South America, among the working classes, among educated academics, progressive academics. You could feel this communal spirit all across South America during the time of all of them coup d'etat, financed, weaponized, and organized by the Americans. So maybe this is going to be version 2.0. And starting in Venezuela itself. So these very shallow specimens in Washington, they don't know what the Pandora's box that they are opening. They have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, I hope that, as this goes on, people who watch this program and take the lesson that as we just dissect all of the various, not just Venezuela, this happened similarly in Iran, the 12-day war. What did our friend Mohammad Marandi say? He said Iranians are more united than ever. Even if we look at Russia, what did the SMO do? What did Ukraine do? Right, the SMO. It's united Russians more than ever. We can say that China has become united more than ever. The more the U.S. becomes more aggressive, and that's because people are a big part of geopolitics. It's not just, do you have the biggest missiles? Do you have the biggest guns? That's really not the determinant of anything. If that were true, then Vietnam wouldn't be an independent country today. Cuba would have fallen 30 times already.
Cuba is still there resisting, exactly.
Yeah, and they want to go after Cuba. It's like, okay, well, Cuba's in the worst economic situation it's been in a long time since the special period. But, you attack them, you're going to unite the people even more because that's a direct attack.
Absolutely.
So there's where we are. Well, Pepe, any final words before we head out of here?
No, it's okay. I'm getting a lot of reactions to the Barbaria column. That it's nice. It's nice.
It's great. It's a great column.
Reactions. Okay. Well, but I have to laugh about it because it's so absurd. There are zillions of podcasts of myself in Venezuela. The invasion of AI fakes. You have to laugh about it because it's so absolutely stupid.
Yeah, this is the thing.
So, okay, guys, here with Danny, this is the real one, the first one. Huh?
Yeah. Don't fall for the AI fakes. They're everywhere, and we gotta talk about that. But I'm just pulling up all the super chats and all the members. Sorry, I can't read them out loud. I just want to give all you.
President Trump is just running roughshod over international law. It doesn't even exist right now. period, past tense. It's gone. There is no international law that's going to constrain President Trump. There is no domestic law in the United States that's going to constrain President Trump. There is no political balance of powers or anything else. The Constitution, none of that stuff will constrain him. He will do whatever he wants, because when anyone has tried to hold back with words, it's meaningless. He just does what he wants, and you see he continues to go forward, and now he's threatening all these other countries. Well, if it's in our hemisphere, that's one thing. Europeans could not like it. They could say, well, this kind of is embarrassing because we claim to care about international law. We claim to care about, doing the right thing and the rules-based order and all this kind of stuff. And obviously there's no truth to it when they just stand silently by, won't even offer any kind of criticism when given the opportunity to do so. And so people are seeing it doesn't mean anything. Well, it's one thing when it's over here. What about if it's Greenland? Because now we have the issue with Denmark. They're really concerned because they see that Trump said all this stuff about Venezuela, carried it through. They see that he's talking about, destroying Cuba, and he's taken action that seems like it's going to carry that through. He's threatening Colombia. Who knows if he's going to do anything with that or not? He's threatened Mexico. I mean, where does it stop? Because when you get this, and I had a show the other day called Blood in the Water, like a shark, when it starts getting blood, it just goes crazy and it goes on a feeding frenzy. That's kind of what we're facing right now, and why the Europeans should be a lot more concerned than they are, and they need to be standing up for what used to be the values of the West. Used to be our values. It was never perfectly done. There was always some dark edges and some shady undersides. Unfortunately, we've never been clean all the way through, but at least in the world, we did try. We actually did things that were good. We actually did things that benefited other countries. We actually did restrain ourselves. We actually did follow the rule of law to a degree. That's gone. Whatever sins we may have had in the past, they're pale in comparison to where we are now. So the question is, to my European friends, is anyone ever going to stand up? Do you actually have values? Do you actually believe in the rule of law? Do you actually believe that there should be freedom and that people should have the right to whatever kind of government they were, self-determination? Or are those just words that you use to dominate other people? And now that when it's not working that way, you just want to go, well, I need more information. I need all the facts. I got to talk. Come on. Either you believe it or you don't. This stuff is not hard. There comes a point to where if you're going to man up and be a leader and say what you believe and then act on it. And if you don't act on it, then I could care less what words come out of your mouth, because your actions will speak louder, and that will say, and if they say silent, then we're going to know there are no values for the Europeans except for whatever president of the United States says. But what are you going to do if President Trump actually moves against Greenland? We may find out. We may find out that there actually is a limit to the Europeans. They may actually have some values that can be unearthed, because there are a lot of Europeans who do. I know many of them who are very much appalled by this and who are livid with what's going on and are angry at their own people. You see, even the presenters at the British media there are asking really hard questions. Now, I wish they'd have followed those up with some more, but at least they ask them, and that by itself is a moniker of potential change. They're going to have a lot more of that, because it's not out of the question that we couldn't do more. And that President Trump and his feeding frenzy, blood in the water kind of moment, may just say, yeah, I'm going to take Greenland. You can either get out of the way and give me what I want and submit and bend the knee like Venezuela, I'm trying to get them to do, or I'll just take it. That's not out of the question. That's not a hyperbolic statement anymore. That's actually legitimately possible. And the Prime Minister of Denmark is right to be worried about it. And Europeans should be more worried about it than they are. We'll see how that's going to work out. One of the things that does not lead to a positive hope that we're not going to take down that path is another thing that a couple of other things I want to point out. One is that in that same Ambassador Whitaker I pointed out a minute ago, talking about what's happened in Paris, he also talked about, kind of reinforcing what Secretary Hegseth said about how great we are and how awesome, and what everybody in the world should have learned from this Venezuela op.
it's a big win for the United States of America and the security of the Western Hemisphere. I think any adversary of the United States should be concerned about what they saw the United States do, because one, it demonstrated capabilities that no other country can execute. And at the same time, it demonstrates that the United States, when the president says something, when we draw a red line, that we're willing to enforce that with our power. And that, to me, is what ensures peace through strength.
Peace through strength. No, what that does is say, I'm going to instill fear in everybody, that I'm going to take what I want. I'm going to ask you an honest question here. Be honest. Does that not sound like Hitler and Czechoslovakia in the 1930s? I mean, honestly, this is what we accuse Hitler of doing all the time. He crept up. First, it was the Sudetenland, and then he took over Czechoslovakia. Then they reinvaded the Rhineland area, right next to France, against the Versailles Treaty. Sorry, that was first. Then they took the Sudetenland, and then they had the Anschluss in Austria, bit by bit by bit. But that's all I'm going to do. That's all I'm going to take, etc. And then, of course, they call everybody to appeasers because Neville Chamberlain, said, yeah, we had peace in our time and all that kind of stuff, right? Because they saw Hitler doing all these things, and everybody says, all right, well, that's all he's going to do. The Versailles Peace Treaty, well, that wasn't fair anyway. So that put unjust. This kind of replaced all that. Whatever, they can justify anything in the world because they didn't want to have a war. And then we know what happened from that point. Now, unlike the Wehrmacht, unlike the Hitler's Germany, we don't have the armed forces that can do a whole lot more. But President Trump may not be constrained by that. He may not be aware that we can't do those things, and he may keep going and keep trying to do more things here. I mean, literally, we're already, Colombia might be in the crosshairs, Mexico might be in the crosshairs, even Cuba might be in the crosshairs, although they'll probably just try and strangle them economically, and Greenland could be in the crosshairs. All those things are possible. And at what point do you say, well, he meant this as Venezuela? And you heard Ambassador Whitaker himself say that's the lesson you're supposed to get. When President Trump says something, he means it. So you either get the hell out of the way, give him what he asked for, or we'll take it. Tell me that's not what he said and what they have done. So if that's the message, that's an alarm for us in the West. We are at a point to where we better start paying attention, because we don't know how far President Trump is going to go. And if nobody holds him accountable, I mean, I just told you, the Congress isn't, the Constitution is not, law is not, American law, international law, nothing is proving constraint to him. Only us, only we can, only our allies. If ever there was a time for Keir Starmer, for Emmanuel Macron, for all these folks, Merz, to stand up and say no, for the Prime Minister of Holland, no, that's it. You cannot go here. This line and no further. If we can't say that to ourselves, where is he going to stop? Because evidence suggests that he may be going a lot further, and it's a roll of the dice to say, well, he doesn't mean that. You realize that's what they said about Hitler. He didn't mean that. He's not going to go to war and take Poland, right? He did all these other things, but that's just fill in the blank. They made all these excuses, but his evidence said that he was. Now, at this moment in history, I have no idea. I don't know what Trump's doing. He could well just be blustering. He may have in his mind, all right, this is as far as I could go Venezuela, because that was relatively easy, but I can't actually go to war with Colombia. We don't have the troops for that. I'm definitely not going to do it in Mexico and have all this instability on my actual border. He may just be wanting to bluster and saying, I'll just talk a good game because of these other things that I've done. And so then they'll understand it. They'll just give me what I want. And otherwise, they'll just make up some excuse. That is entirely possible. That may be exactly what he's doing. I hope. But even when you're looking at, there was another Senator Schmidt who posted this video of him himself on the news, where he's saying that not only should some of our adversaries get this message, but also specifically another nuclear power, China, should also get the message.
This is making sure the Venezuelan people can actually
They've been sort of ridden of Maduro now. They're going to move forward. And again, the U.S. has a very important interest here in the Western Hemisphere, that Venezuela isn't the playground for the CCP, which is what the CCP wanted. It's very interesting that that Chinese delegation was there.
Yeah.
If you don't think China noticed that we were able to do this under the cover of darkness without them knowing anything about it, that's a very important point, too, for deterrence as well.
Because that's what worries me. He may believe what he's saying there. He may think that, oh, them Chinese, they were on the ground in Venezuela. They saw when we come in that only America could have pulled off an operation like this. So they better beware. This is our hemisphere, hands off. Except that, well, simultaneous to that and concurrent with that, while they had to get the hell out of our hemisphere, that means China and Russia too. Nobody can do anything except what we authorize the entire hemisphere. Rubio's been preaching that like a gospel. But we can go into your hemisphere, China. We can go into your hemisphere, Russia. We can move a military alliance right up to your border. We can have it literally on your border. We can move German troops, for example, NATO troops into the Baltic areas. We can add to it. We can build up all this stuff on your border. That's fine. There's no problem with that. And you better not complain about it. China, we're going to continue to have all these military bases throughout. We're going to have the AUKUS group. We're going to have Five Eyes, all kinds of stuff in that area. We're going to improve our military bases on Japan. We have military bases in the Philippines. We have military base on Guam. We have military base in South Korea. All those kind of things, all arrayed against you. We're going to say that we're going to build up this big Pacific initiative, and we're going to spend billions of dollars in the coming year because we think we might have to go to war with you. That's fine. No problem with that on your freaking doorsteps. But you can't even come in our hemisphere or we're going crazy about it. That is an imperial country that wants to be a global dominance. That is the kind of actions that sends fears throughout the world, adversaries and friends. This is not peace through strength. This is, you are destroying our future hope and stability because you are giving people a reason around the world to fear us in the worst way. Not the respect that you claim that you want, which is healthy. This is fear, like, and anger, like we better do something while we can before you get too big. And we have to be ready to take action because we don't know when you're coming for us next. That's the kind of behavior that causes people to take action against your interest for fear of what you may do later. It does not provide deterrence. See, what Secretary Hegseth and Senator Schmidt and all these other guys like Stephen Miller, they want a boot on your neck. They want you to, as General Keane said, bend the knee to what we're telling you to do. It doesn't work, folks. It's never worked. That always makes people rise up against you. That doesn't get any respect. That doesn't get any admiration other than other people who want you to do that on their behalf. So a lot of people are certainly cheering it on. Let me not mischaracterize it. But in the main, normal people don't like that and they fear it. And history says they'll eventually take action against it. That's what you need to understand. So those who may be tempted to have all these claps and applause and all this to what's going on, you need to understand this has some dark undertones and you've gone too far without any constraints, either from our own laws and constitution or from our allies and our friends. Sometimes, man, you know, we should talk about friends don't let friends drive drunk, right? So you see somebody who's drunk, get behind the wheel, just getting out of the way or getting in the back seat and saying, well, I can't say anything. He's a popular guy. You know that could get a lot of people killed. Same kind of situation here. Keir Starmer ain't doing us any favors. He's not doing his own country any favors. Emmanuel Macron, by not saying a word to Trump and equivocating all this, because that communicates weakness. Trump rightly regards that as you're a vassal. Just like I want Venezuela to bend the knee, I expect you to bend the knee. I expect everybody to give fealty to me without any constraints. That's not healthy. It's not healthy for Europe. It's not healthy for America. Someday, at one of these points, we're going to have to get a hold on this, folks. Otherwise, we may find ourselves in a war where someone finally puts us to the test and says, I don't believe you can do it. Prove to me that you have the manpower, that you have the industrial capacity, and you have the will to actually fight and sustain a war and endure casualties. We do. Somebody may count chances that one day. and push us to the test. And I'm telling you, I'm begging you to understand, we can't fight a war of attrition right now against anything close to a peer organization. We can't do it. That's where we are, folks. That's what you need to understand. So let's take a calming pill on all this euphoria and enthusiasm over this massive success that we claim in Venezuela, and understand this is point one. We don't even know how this one's going to turn out, because we still don't know what Venezuela is going to do. Are they going to bend the knee, or are they going to start resisting? Who knows how this is going to work out? But you see, there's a lot of other things at play here, and we need to be sober-minded about all of this.
Hedges, he'd be my pick for Secretary of State rather than little Marco Rubio. Apart from anything else, he certainly wouldn't be owned by Miriam Adelson, but he has many more attributes than that. Pulitzer Prize winner, former head of the New York Times Middle East Bureau, a man used to the kind of things that we've seen over the last couple of days. And I'm keen, as I know you will be, to get his take. Well, as I asked Professor Morandi, Chris, what just happened there?
Well, the same thing that happened in Gaza, which is a complete disregard for international law. The seizing of Maduro and his wife on the pretense of drug trafficking, and there's no evidence, by the way, Maduro is actually not suspected of being involved in the narcotics trade at all. It makes as much sense as perpetuating a genocide in the name of Israel's right to defend itself. We know what this is about, the same thing that the invasion of Iraq was about. It is about the seizure of vast oil reserves. It is about breaking the back of any government or regime that defies the United States. We saw that again in the Middle East with the attacks against Hezbollah on the part of Israel, the bombings in Iran, both by Israel and the United States, and Israel's decimation of the military infrastructure in Syria following the overthrow of Assad. So it's about a world without law, a world without rules, where the strong prey on the weak, and that is, and what's frightening, of course, at the very moment that they're carrying out this incredible, egregious violation of his Venezuelan sovereignty, they're already talking about Cuba and Iran.
Well, we'll come to some of those points later, but this law of the jungle, and it was, I think, perfectly personified by Donald Trump in his train crash interview. I don't know if his officials are unable to persuade him when to shut up, but the more he went on, the more damning were the things that he was saying. But this might catch on, Chris. I mean, on the basis of what Trump did and said about what he did, Moscow could land troops in Kiev right now and seize Zelensky and take him for trial. The Chinese could do the same in Taiwan. Turkey could do the same in Cyprus. I mean, this law of the jungle can cut two ways, can't it?
Of course. Well, it essentially, and I would go back to the UN ratification, Security Council's ratification with Chinese and Russia abstentions, endorsing this ridiculous, you can't call it a peace plan, it's a sham of a peace plan. And that's where the UN Security Council went to die, in essence. And we're watching a disintegration of the rules-based order, which was often violated by imperial powers like the United States, of course. But there's no pretense anymore. And that's precisely what led to the catastrophic global wars in World War I or World War II. There was no mechanism to thwart the predatory nature of stronger states upon weaker states And that's essentially the role the United States is playing at this point. It's very frightening and very ominous.
Are the United States strong enough to carry this on? I mean, they're openly threatening Denmark. They're openly threatening Iran. They're in war by other means against China. They were involved, many people believe, in the attack on President Putin's residence in Sochi, in Valdai. They are basically at war on multiple fronts. Are they strong enough for that?
Well, that's a very good question. I think you have to look at the United States empire as a wounded animal that's lashing out ultimately futilely to regain a lost hegemony. And that's what late empires do. And they engage in military adventurism, which only accelerates the decline. They have the military force to initially succeed in the same way that Israel is initially succeeding in the Middle East. But the long-term consequences, as we saw with the 20 years of debacles in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, they can't deal with. They create Frankensteinian monsters of their own creation that slay them ultimately. But the preponderance of military force that they have, Israel has it, the United States has it, allows them to carry out what's classically termed as overreach. And then they essentially light these conflagrations that they can't put out and that grow and that further their own demise. So initially, yes, ultimately in the long term, it's self-destructive.
Now, it's clear that Washington has accepted that the acting president, Rodriguez, in Caracas is in charge of the country. I've seen, as you will have, massive mobilizations of the Chavista forces in Venezuela all day today. The American networks were having to show footage from Miami and pretend it was from Venezuela, welcoming the kidnapping of the president, because the actual footage in Venezuela was of crowds of millions of people in support of the revolution. The Chavista movement is in power in Caracas still. So what have we got here? This conundrum that exists, where the prince over the water is awaiting his day in court, whilst the movement that he led is still in power in the streets in Caracas. How is that a win for the United States?
It's not. It's a kind of Pyrrhic victory, of course. They get Maduro, but they haven't in any way affected the structure. I mean, you saw with the invasion of Iraq, they, of course, immediately and foolishly dismissed all Ba'ath Party members who had worked for Saddam Hussein and disbanded the armed forces and the security forces. And what did they get? They got a virulent insurgency that eventually threw the United States out of Iraq. And the United States companies did not finally, ultimately get the oil fields, which is what they went into Iraq to seize, in the same way that they're attempting to seize the oil fields in Venezuela. So, yeah, by taking out a figure like Saddam Hussein or taking out a figure like Maduro, but essentially not being able to mollify or subdue the security and military forces, not to mention the popular rage at being occupied. Nobody wants to be occupied, Iraqis any more than Venezuelans. That's the whole point. That's my point of creating these Frankensteinian monsters of your own creation. So there's tremendous blowback that, as we saw in the Middle East, is self-defeating. And unfortunately, that's a lesson that the United States empire has not learned. And it's not learned because all of the people who have orchestrated those catastrophes have never been held to account. In fact, they still remain in power.
Was there a traitor in the camp? It's very hard to believe that the United States was able to fly slow-moving helicopters across the skyline in Caracas. We all saw it. If there had been any concerted effort to bring them down, then several of them would have been. it's impossible for me to believe that the president doesn't have sufficient force around him to prevent him and his wife being kidnapped and taken in chains. I mean, you're a man who's acutely conscientized about the origins of your country and the great influx of slaves. It seems to me the Americans love to see people in chains, and that's what we saw Nicolas Maduro in today. But somehow, even in chains, he looked twice the man of the men that had chained him.
In terms of someone on the inner circle, well, I'm almost certain. I mean, the CIA has deep pockets. They have many mechanisms by which they can turn people to essentially act as informants or work on their behalf. I mean, I was overseas, as you know, for 20 years. That was very common. And I agree with you that I think it would have been extremely difficult unless there were moles around Maduro that were assisting the CIA-backed, Delta Force-backed effort. Yeah, I mean, look, this isn't a new story for Latin America. I spent 6 years in Latin America, covered the wars in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. It's not a new story at all. But in fact, Latin Americans are far more conscious of their history and the role of Yankee imperialism in their historical experience than Americans are. And they connect the dots. The Marines landed in Nicaragua to hunt down Augusto Sandino and install Somoza, the dictator of Nicaragua. They landed in the Dominican Republic in 1965 to overthrow a leftist government. They overthrew Arbenz in Guatemala in 1954. They overthrow and facilitated the rise of the dictator Pinochet in 1973 in Chile. I mean, it's on and on and on. And this is just part of that long history of egregious violation and control done by the American imperial power on the behalf of economic interests, whether that was United Fruit in Guatemala or Anaconda Copper in Chile.
I think that Maduro, who's quite a figure, as you know, will dominate the Southern District of New York courtroom, presumably televised live to the world, in a way that may make the U.S. rue the day that they embarked on this. Why didn't they just kill him?
Well, that's what they did with Osama bin Laden, who was probably sold out by the Pakistani ISI. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, the reason they didn't want to bring Osama bin Laden to trial is they didn't have much on him. Al-Qaeda may have been behind 9/11. It probably was, but they didn't have much to lynch him on. And they have nothing to lynch Maduro on. It's anecdotal, but Sheinbaum in Mexico and Maduro were considered the two Latin American leaders that had kept their distance from the drug trade, from the narcotraficantes. They've been hitting those boats repeatedly and with no evidence that they were smuggling drugs at all. So again, it's a fiction. Again, fentanyl, of course, is the killer in the United States. There's no evidence that I know of that Colombia is a source of fentanyl. So, yeah, I think you're right. I don't think they have a case against him, and if he's allowed a free trial. But that's a big if. I mean, there are courtrooms in the United States, like the Eastern District Court of Virginia, where they it's one step away from the Lubyanka.
Yeah. Now, I know that you are a man who supports gun control quite religiously. But what do you make of a charge against the president of Venezuela that he was in possession of machine guns?
Well, but because that's the paucity of the case. So he was involved in drugs, and of course he had machine guns. Well, I can guarantee you there's plenty of lethal weaponry surrounding any head of state, including, of course, Trump. So it shows the absolute absurdity of the indictment that was written up against him. In the indictment, by the way, they call him the de facto and former president, if I have that right, so it was obviously written up some time ago. It wasn't written up while he was being transported to Brooklyn.
Wow. Now, the heads of the crime families were in conclave in Miami, in Florida, in Mar-a-Lago, I should say, over New Year. I must say there's an unusually close relationship between Donald Trump and Netanyahu. If I were Melania, I'd be getting a bit concerned about it. He's always around. He's even there for the holidays. He's boarding and lodging in their house. What could they possibly have been discussing in this latest conclave?
I think Iran. I think it's all Israel's made it clear they want more strikes. They want the U.S. to join them, and Trump has seemed willing to sign on for that project. I think it's Iran. I think the Israelis are intent upon. I mean, they have this fantasy in Israel about regime change, that they can bomb Iran into regime change. It's kind of the fantasy, I suppose, that was used to perpetuate what's happened in Venezuela. But I think Iran, I'm guessing, but I think Iran was probably number one.
Well, Channel 13 in Israel this evening, which is not always right, but often is, they've said that Israel is sufficiently emboldened by the brilliance of Donald Trump's operation in Caracas to try the same kind of thing in downtown Tehran. What do you think the end result of that would be?
I mean, those things can get very, very messy very quickly. The United States operation was, from the perspective of the United States, quite successful. The decapitation of Hezbollah with the explosive pagers was quite successful. But when they go wrong, they go terribly, terribly wrong. So it's a big gamble. I think that if the Israelis attempt a similar kind of snatch of the Iranian leadership, Iran is not Venezuela, and Iran is not Lebanon, and Iran is not Syria, and Iran is not Hezbollah. Iran was able to inflict some pretty serious damage on Israel. Much of it was hidden, by the way. They hit sites, and Israel blocked, I know from friends in the press, they blocked reporting about those security sites and intelligence sites that Iran did hit. But Israel's not built to sustain a war of attrition. I mean, I aside from the fact that it is patently, a violation of international law and international sovereignty and the UN Charter and everything else, these kinds of activities, which the Trump administration has already expressed their desire to expand, eventually blow up in your face. And that's a lesson we should have learned. The United States should have learned in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Syria, in Afghanistan, both times in Afghanistan when they empowered the Mujahideen to go after the Soviets, and then when they tried to occupy and control Afghanistan for 2 decades. So this is headed down a very, very frightening path. And the success of the operation in Venezuela may, in fact, accelerate the collapse of the U.S. empire, because it will begin to carry out all sorts of other activities that not only won't go well, but will backfire on them in horrific ways, in the way that the 20 years of debacles in the Middle East backfired on the United States.
Finally, Chris, and I'm grateful for your time. What does this mean for the other players in the region? Rubio singled out Cuba today, said the Cuban government was now in serious trouble. What does it mean for China, that was left, to borrow a metaphor from Al Pacino in The Godfather, left with its dick in its hand in Caracas, meeting Maduro, just hours before he's then kidnapped, and China not able really to do anything other than condemn it. What does it mean for Russia, which was and is very closely associated with Venezuela? What does it mean for the other players?
Well, it creates more antagonisms. Remember, China and Russia also have alliances with Iran. And as the United States goes completely rogue, as we can start with the genocide, but not only the genocide, as I mentioned, the bombings in Yemen, the bombings in Iran, the invasion, let's call it what it is, in Venezuela, as these things expand, other powers, major powers like Russia and China, will have to become more aggressive in a sense to counter the aggressivity of the United States. I think that's what it means. And further alienation with major nuclear powers. Believe me, these people like Rubio and Miller and Vance and Trump, you do not want these people controlling a nuclear arsenal with no oversight at all. Congress is just a specter, a ghost. It's an useless appendage. It doesn't even pass legislation. I think they passed 38 bills last year, which is virtually zero. Trump rules by executive decree. He didn't even inform Congress of what he was doing in Venezuela. So as the United States goes rogue, it forces other major powers to react.
Goes
and that's
rogue,
what you'll
it
see.
really goes rogue. Just give us a taste, if you will, Chris. And this time, I promise you, finally, give us a taste of how this is playing in Peoria. How is it playing in the liberal printing publishing houses? How is it playing on MSNBC?
It's being condemned on the one hand. On the other hand, everything that's being condemned by the Democratic Party and the liberal establishment is meaningless because they won't take any active measures to thwart Trump. What are those measures? That's mass mobilization, strikes. At this point, the only ability to curb the rising authoritarianism and the evisceration of the rule of law. But they won't call for that because the Democratic Party leadership is despised and hated and is as beholden to corporate and oligarchic power as Trump is. And they know that if they were actually to build those kind of mass movements, it's why the Democratic Party establishment has been so hostile to the new mayor of New York, Mamdani. I mean, they treat him as if he has leprosy. Why? Because those movements would sweep them aside. And they've decided they would rather stay in power as the ship sinks than give up power, and the ship is sinking.
Venezuela. Diego Sequeira, he's in Baranas. He's a very famous writer and journalist and political figure in Venezuela. And I met him with my good wife, Gayatri, the last time we were there in Caracas. Diego, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. Is it politic to ask you what's the atmosphere like in Venezuela right now?
Sure, man. Thank you for having me, George. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for focusing on what's going on here in my country. Yes, I mean, the atmosphere hasn't, after the shock, it hasn't changed that much as it has been under extreme pressure from, already almost 5 months up to this point. I mean, you have two reactions that are basically, and this is informed. I've been traveling. Yesterday, I was traveling the whole day yesterday, including small rural towns. So I had the opportunity to feel what people are saying or what they are doing. So you have like two different strains here. One is calmness and expecting, some expectation of what could do. And the other one, it's people incensed and mobilizing. Today, there are many demos going on throughout the country, including where I am. Barinas, by the way, is a state where Hugo Chavez was born. And actually, once I'm going to head there once I'm free of interviews today. But yeah, those are the two main reactions that you can see right now at this current moment. Is it going to change soon enough? I don't know. It's hard to predict. But this goes in tune with how it has been throughout all this month. People here are very cognizant of this kind of intense pressure. And of course, yesterday was a breaking point, no doubt about that, that has never happened before in Venezuela's history, at least in recent history, not since 1902. And it was a naval blockade back then. And so in that sense, there is not any sort of social breakdown, upheaval, or unrest that could work for the benefit of some of the regime changes up to this point. And I think this is the most important thing to address.
Well, let's address one or two other points, Diego, that flow from what you've just said. And what Marco Rubio, about whom we had a long conversation in Caracas a year ago. If the situation is that let's call it the Chavez movement, remains in state power in Venezuela, and I want your confirmation that it is still in state power. If it remains as the hegemonic force, the dominant force in Venezuela, then how is that a win for the United States? What might be going on under the surface that would change my perception that this is not a win for the United States at all? And secondly, I appreciate this is a difficult question to ask you. Both Chris Hedges and I believe that this could not have happened but for betrayal somewhere. Have you a comment on that?
Yes, regarding the first part of the question, I agree with you. I think this is a sugar high win. I think it's a short-term kind of win. And even within that context, if you saw, I'm sure you did, the footage, the first, let's call it a statement of Presidente Maduro yesterday, when he just said, asked Celia Flores, his wife, he said in Spanish, said, he said good night. He said good night? And she said, yes, it's good night. So he said, good night, Happy New Year, and smiled at the camera. That's a sign of defiance. You can call it a sign of Caraqueño or Latino defiance, if you will. And I don't think there's a real logical midterm calculation to what they're doing now. And of course, if it gets to succeed, which I'm also skeptical about it, what's going to happen with the rest of the region and the blowback that this can bring. This is not 1,000 kilometers away, just as Iraq was. The dynamics here are different, are closer to the United States, and they can be, and they are more harmful in a shorter time for the U.S. population. In many ways, call it migration, fuel price, or whatever. That's something that those variants, I don't know how much aware they are, especially now that they're trying to give Rubio, although they're trying to shift the narrative now, this viceroyalship kind of proconsulate of Venezuela. And there is and this is important because I was in another mainstream media channel, a couple of interviews back, in which they talk about a power vacuum. And this is not the case at all. I mean, now we have an interim president that her first demand is to bring back the legal, legitimate president of Venezuela. And this was decided by the Supreme Court under the Venezuelan Constitution and has been acknowledged by the Venezuelan military. Now, on the second point, and I have to tread as careful as I can because I don't have any confirmation or any inside information to share, but my own personal speculation is, yes, I think there was a combination. It could be we have to wait for more evidence and goods to be delivered, and I think we're going to see that this week at some point. But a combination of electronic warfare and, yes, to some extent, betrayal, which I don't know if the traitor right now or the traitors are now under the government and the law enforcement scrutinies. We should wait. I mean, they're being cautious about it, but I'm certain that we will know what happened here, because yes, I mean, we saw the footage and we saw how easily it was for a moment to do what they did. So it makes sense. And also, I would also like to address, if this is the case, I would like to challenge all the obfuscation that, New York Times and others are saying about all this sophisticated infiltration operation and so forth. If it was this way, it was pure and sheer bribery. I don't think it needed that much just to, other than human, to pick the proper guy to do this and to infiltrate him, and nothing more beyond that. But another dangerous strain, I think, that we have to take into account is what was the role of AI in, the AI tycoons in screening and surveilling and designating a bank of targets and so on, which is something that I also cannot prove at this point, but these are the first impressions I get.
Do you trust acting President Rodriguez?
I do. I certainly do. Mind you, she was the one that actually was able to tame the economic madness back then. And also, there's no space. I don't see any kind of space to it, to some sort of backdoor deal of sorts. He has been already threatened by Trump just a few hours ago, saying that if she doesn't comply, it's going to be even worse. I'm paraphrasing here, even worse than with Maduro. So that's not exactly, I don't know, maybe it's, Trump swaggering or something, trying to shadow play it, but I find it quite hard. And also, even in the worst, let's be malicious about it for a moment. What can work for your benefit here, and how much is granted that you actually are gonna that agreement is going to be delivered from a non-agreement capable country that has so many different voices at the same time, a schizoid country, schizoid empire. So even in a more cynical calculation, and this is me just doing an exercise of imagination, I'm not saying this is what's going on. It sounds pretty hard or beneficial. And that Rome doesn't pay, man. So I don't know how much that it will be there. And I do trust her. And it's not only her, it's also the Interior Minister, Diosdado Cabello, and also Vladimir Padrino Lopez, the Defense Minister, which are basically on the three specific and sensitive areas taking care of the country right now. So I do trust her.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Wall Street moves fast, sometimes faster than diplomats, faster than today. Even
Coffee. Follow me.